Hello, hello, hello. If you can, why did you use a semicolon? What's up with that?
I tapped the wrong button. So I just dropped a semicolon into the comments when I was meant to drop an apostrophe. Let's semicolon go. Yay!
Yeah, I want to make it very clear that was not me. That was Andy.
Yeah, that was 100% me. Hopefully you can all hear us out there.
Yeah, if you can, please do let us know just to make sure everything's working because like I said, the one time I'll trust is the one time it won't work. So hopefully everyone's doing well today. Yes. Always fun to be coming in on a bonus day. We haven't gotten to do a non-Sunday Wednesday one in a hot while.
So very true. And tonight, my episode of LAWhammer, which was supposed to go up tonight, and apparently I've just gone out of focus. I am soft-focused. Look at that. Hey. That aside, the episode of LAWhammer that was supposed to go up this evening didn't because we had a technical issue. So it's at the moment crawling onto YouTube bit by tiny bit, and it's a 4K video, so it's going to take hours. So we're going to be lucky if it actually gets up today. So that being the case, then hey, we're doing a stream live, so it works really well.
I can just come watch this, and then totally. Tomorrow. It's fine. It's great. It's almost like we planned for it.
I 100% planned this. It wasn't the gremlins sneaking into the wires and just ranking bits out. Oh.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and, in case y'all haven't noticed, we're joined by someone else today. We're joined by the wonderful and super lovely Vera. Vera, if you'd like to kind of introduce yourself and what it is you do to kind of let everybody know how you're doing, and I can check your audio levels.
Yeah, hi, I'm Vera. Verisimila, like verisimilitude. Whoa, I do a lot of things. You might be more familiar with my work as Naomi Hunter, like the character from Metal Gear. I have been writing for Warhammer 4th edition for a little while, and I have had a wonderful time doing so. I've contributed to Tribes and Tribulations. I've contributed to both of the Elf books that have come out recently. I will be contributing to some of the material for the Old World RPG, and I have a few other projects upcoming with C7. Very nice to meet you. Very nice to be here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. And chat, if she is too quiet compared to us because we like to shout, just let me know and I'll boost her up more.
As far as I can tell, it's really good from this side.
But yeah, so a lot of really exciting things to talk about today. We're going to be kind of meandering from talking about the occasional book stuff, and then we'll also be getting into a lot of elf things, because in the chats that we've gotten to have, elves kind of seem to be a common thing that keep popping up, so it's like might as well win in Ulthuan after all. So we've got a lot of really exciting things to come up. And also real quick, Hannibal, hey, congrats for graduating.
Congratulations.
Very exciting. Mate, welcome to freedom. Hope it goes well.
Freedom.
All right. Yeah, free. It's a type of freedom.
I'm off to get a job. I'm off to. Oh.
It comes with the goods and the ills. But we're going to go ahead and just do kind of the usual thing. For anyone that may be joining us for the first time for whatever reason, as people throw in like bit messages or super chats and stuff, we kind of just grab those out here right at the beginning, and then we'll hit like little breaks where we'll grab them just to keep up with comments that y'all do, because we love all of y'all. But if we try and read everything that everyone puts out, we would never get anywhere. So
true fact.
So we try and prioritize those messages. So we'll go ahead and grab the ones right here at the start, and then we'll just get into it. Captain Magma says, looking to establish a portfolio to work toward being a game narrative writer, such as some of you, is there anything imperative you would recommend that I include in this? Vera, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. So my portfolio for C7 included fan work for Warhammer that was in the format of 4th edition, which helped a little bit. It also included a lot of fictional works from different settings, some researched academic writing that had to do with anthropology and sociology. So I would say that having a somewhat wide portfolio that shows you can do different kinds of things, like technical writing, writing to tone can matter, as can, of course, character writing. If you're applying to a specific company, having like a writing sample that you've created in that style might help a little bit, just because it shows that you're able to work in that vein of thing and produce the kind of content they're hoping you can if hired.
Yeah, I agree hard. So back when I was running things, when my beard was a little bit less grey, you'd often get a whole bunch of different submissions coming towards you from people who were very keen to work on that thing that they love, because obviously, who doesn't want to work on the thing they're deeply passionate about? And a lot of people would send in things that had, one, nothing to do at all with what they wanted to write, which, whilst it's nice, it doesn't really help someone who's sitting there going, do I want to employ this person, decide whether you can match the tone, match a core brief, understand how to present NPCs, or understand how to describe a location in a way that's both imaginative and exciting, but also provides enough space for individual GMs to go, not only I can use that, but go, I can turn that into something I really want to use. Because roleplay writing is not just about telling stories. In fact, it's often not about that at all. It's about inspiring other people to tell stories. And that core point of inspiration can be difficult for many writers, particularly if they're coming from a traditional background where they're used to telling stories with fiction. So presenting something that's not only in the style of the place that you're approaching, but also matches the tones and different tones of the type of work that they produce is not just core, it's essential. And one that a lot of people forget. Tailor it, and if you can, be brief. And by that I mean, don't just throw everything. Think about what you're sending to them, as in, do I want them to read this? And does it help me get the job? And also, by being brief, I mean, don't send 150 pages. Hell, don't send 20 or even 5. Send carefully chosen, maybe 3-page skits, 1-page sheets, 2 or 3-page sections of text that best match what you think they want to hear. Far better than just, here's a book. I did this. I love it. It's great. By the way, you should publish it, because they almost certainly have got their own plans for what they want to publish, and it's exceedingly unlikely to be the thing that you sent them. So tailor it, really tightly tailor it, because what you're sending not just tells them whether you can write or not, but also shows whether you can think about the sort of things they want to hear. And if you send all the stuff, they'll often just open it up and go, well, that's a lot of stuff. I don't have time for this, and then move to the next step.
There you go. And I have nothing to contribute here. I'm just a man that bitches on the internet, and that's worked out okay for me. Biofed, what does Vera think about Loremaster of Sotek's that don't put words in my mouth, assertion that fishmen have taken up living in the caves of Cothique? Okay, so to clarify, first of all, there are fishmen in this book, so sit on it. Second of all, I didn't assert that. I merely suggested that. So for anyone that hasn't read, if you go back to, I think, 7th and 8th edition High Elf book, there's some mentions that the caves of Cothique, many of them have fallen underwater, and there are said to be things that have moved in or living there. So could it be fishmen? I don't know. Vera, do you think it could be fishmen?
Oh, it could be a lot of things potentially. There's all sorts of lost space down there for the GM to play with. Lots of sunken caverns and areas that are only accessible at low tide, perhaps. There's a lot of room to explore. There could be anything.
And if you think I'm crazy, go read page 6 in the new book. That's all I'm going to say. Just go read page 6. Mr. Warren, I've ordered the collector's edition of Cothique. However, a page dedicated to Shadowblade, but none for glorious Sea Lord Iceland? Unacceptable.
Again, just to say this, because I have to say this before we go in. It's Ashlyn, because it's not an English name, it's an Irish name, or a Scots-Irish at that as well, but Ashlyn, unless, of course, you're pronouncing it like someone from America.
Well, spoiler. Also,
Craig is pronounced Craig, not Craig. Just saying.
I can't be bothered. Can't be bothered. So what I will say, Vorn, is that technically, he's not from Cothique. He's from, I believe he's from Etain, but he has a big thing of being with the Lothern fleet, which isn't really the focus of this book. Second of all, he appears in the Lustria book. So just go read the Lustria book.
So Ashlyn's around, worry not.
Yeah, plus he's getting pretty big in the old world, so you might see him there later. Mm-hmm. Hannibal, hey gang! Oh wait, we hit that. Congrats again. Pormisha, greetings and welcome. Thank you, Pormisha. Thank you.
Greetings to you also. Hello.
Necroid Scobald, howdy y'all. Sadly working. The stream will be fun to watch back since I'm currently reading Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition. Children of the Horned Rat for the first time for the campaign I'm playing as a Skaven in. Have fun.
That takes me back. I remember I'm doing work for that book a bajillion years ago, back when I had a ginger beard.
Yeah, dinosaurs roam the earth.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sotek. Thanks for that. Really appreciated.
Have a good time. It's a super fun book. They did a really good job in that one of like
how
to play Skaven. It's very fun. Lorebeards never go off on a tangent. Nope, never happened once. Necroid Scobald. Also, since you're the oldest in
bloody hell.
Oldest in call.
What's that, Sonny? I didn't quite hear it.
I could be.
Yeah, I mean that's true. A VTuber, you never know. A VTuber or virtual YouTuber is like a TTRPG PC. I think Andy can figure out what a VTuber is.
I know what a VTuber is. For goodness sake, it's not that I'm not that old. I kind of am, but I've got kids.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. Both of whom are at the perfect VTuber age.
Generally asked, Vera, do you have what you would consider any Warhammer headcanon hot takes?
Ooh, any headcanon hot
Ruby
take?
just walks in and just is like, here, bullet, dodge.
My hottest take is that Kurnus and Anathrema are meant to be together.
Ooh. Okay, do you want to expand on that, any?
Who needs to? You can just imagine it. It's beautiful.
I can't imagine it. Like they do have those vibes.
They have a lot in common, don't they? And Kurnus' loving wife seems to not enjoy when he spends too much time with Rema. There's something to that. I would also point to in Age of Sigmar, the sort of aspect that he takes on, the remnants of him that are not claimed, right? He takes on this sort of wilder nature that I think is very in line with Rema. There could be some spiritual connection there, some alignment that makes them together in that way. That's my hottest take.
I love that, and not just because Anathrema literally came up in the last episode of LAWhammer. The avatar of Anathrema doing stuff. Ooh. Good times. Oh yeah, our game's crazy.
Yeah, I also really enjoy because Anathrema. So I sat down to do a bunch of stuff for Elf God things, and it's funny how many of them kind of don't pop up until they very, very suddenly do in the later editions of Warhammer. And it's like you have that whole like spurned lover theme, which is fun. But it's like there's just more there because gods are messy. They're always super duper messy.
Plus they're elves as well. Elves are not exactly the most monogamous of people anyway.
Sure.
Why do we have to approach them in such a human fashion? I mean, but there's no reason that good old Anathrema and Kurnus can be off doing their thing, and there's zero issues amongst the rest of them. They are gods after all, and they don't need to be quite so monogamous in how they handle everything.
Very true there. Then Captain Bagwell, and then we can get into other stuff. Adding onto my portfolio question, how valuable would my history's master's degree and my undergrad minor in game design be for this?
Okay, so I'm going to drop in this one immediately because I know it could be a lot. The creator of Warhammer had very much that sort of degree. The creator of much of what we understand as Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay today was indeed, again, running on history as a core component of it. Graham Davis, who wrote the first treatments of much of the gods in Warhammer, who did a whole chunk of the Enemy Within, and indeed did the most recent job of running the Enemy Within together for the current edition, and he's my bestest mate. He, very much, archaeology and history was core to that, so yes.
I don't know. Vera, you have anything to add?
Oh, I would agree. Like my background is in English, so that's my degree. But I found yes, following in Andy's footsteps. Wow. But yes. I think it's useful to have an academic background in anthropology, sociology, history, the humanities. Warhammer is tied very much to the structure of a living world, and it tries to present itself that way. I think that's great use, and game design, of course, helps in making systems.
And it also gets used to the core concept of a deadline. whooshing over your head, but a deadline and writing to a particular style that you hope will pass grade. All of these things are just useful skills to have in your back pocket for when you're actually doing writing to somebody else's spec.
There you go. Osman Torres. Hi, Vera. Cool to have you on Lorebeards, even though you don't have a beard. Listen, first of all, VTuber, you don't know that for sure. Second
100%.
of all, anyone that talks about Warhammer, even for a fraction of a second, gains an internal beard. You can't see it until they do a what do you call it? Autopsy. There we go. But yeah, Vera, have you ever played any of the Total War Warhammer games? And if not, do you know about them?
As a matter of fact, I have. Yeah, I have played a good little bit of 2 and 3. I am not very good at them, but I do like them. I'm more of an action gamer, though. I've played a great deal of Vermintide and Vermintide 2 and Darktide, and I've played a good bit of the 40k CRPG for Rogue Trader as well. I'm quite looking forward to Dark Heresy too. So yes, I am a video gamer, believe it or not.
VTuber that plays video games? What?
Whoa, crazy! I know. I'm gonna be the first.
Yeah.
Shock!
Blue Oyster Cultist, we're only a few steps away from Pipkin Pippa on the show. She would drive Andy insane quicker than Nurgle ever did. First of all, I think you grossly underestimate Andy's ability to adapt. And second of all, that would be a strange universe. That would be a very strange universe. Jack Ruby, Vera, should Crimlo the Slan be returned as a canon character to the setting? And do you like Balthazar Gelt? For no reason whatsoever, they're asking that question.
Okay, so they're asking that one because
Gelt. I do.
Yeah,
it's just a start.
Sure, Gelt's great.
He's just too much of a Gorman stan. He can't help it.
That's understandable.
All right, so with that, we're pretty much caught up. So now we can actually get into having some fun discussions about some things.
Oh, hi.
So now I think it's a good time that Andy was super kind enough to kind of go through the trouble of giving us a bunch of sort of banner questions so that we could have like a vague framework to work in, so we end up don't just piddling our thumbs this entire time. So we can jump in with for Vera, and we'll just go where the conversation takes us.
Totally.
But what first brought you to Warhammer Fantasy as a setting for the first time? Was it lore, aesthetics, tone, something else? Like what got you into the orbit of Warhammer Fantasy?
Yeah, so I was more familiar with Warhammer 40k growing up, just from osmosis about Space Marines and Battle Brothers and the God Emperor himself. And then, and I believe 2015, I discovered in my Steam queue a little game called Vermintide, which I took a pretty strong interest in as a Left 4 Dead player, been quite serious. And then I proceeded to engage with that pretty deeply. And then I took interest in the stories surrounding it. I was very interested in the depth I saw in the castles and towns in the setting, the way the characters expressed themselves and talked to one another. I thought there was a lot of soul there, a lot of heart to the kind of characterization that I saw. And I read some novels in the background of the Reichland, and I proceeded to play a lot of Vermintide 2, many hundreds of hours on high difficulties and late into the evening. And sort of took my interest from there. I became very interested in the tabletop setting as well, especially after I began playing Dark Heresy with my current tabletop group, who I've been doing things with for going on 10 years now as well.
Nice.
We played Fantasy Flights games. We played 4th edition of Warhammer. We've been very deep into different corners of fantasy and 40k, and I've sort of taken it from there. Like I've learned a lot more since I've come on and tried to study wholeheartedly everything that I don't know about the setting. But my first in was definitely Vermintide, and just the essence of the setting I saw distilled there.
Okay, so the core follow-up question would be, who's your main?
Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Shocker. Me too. I'm the same. So it's interesting you should say that, because when we were deciding what to do for the starter set for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, The primary access point for many people before that point was either Total War, because obviously Warhammer as a setting was dead at that point because there's no official games from Games Workshop, or alternatively Vermintide. And because Total War doesn't have a single core setting or place that you can say, this is Total War, we went for Ubersreich from Vermintide for the starter set, so that there was an immediate verisimilitude for people who are going from the computer games into the role-playing game. And it looks like you were our target audience, and look at where it's got to. Woohoo!
Oh my God, it worked.
It worked! It was really nice as well, because all the folks over at Fat Shark who made the game were super, super nice. And they sent over like big development builds of their game so that I could swoop around inside their version of Ubersreich. And they allowed us to use all of their effectively assets and art and all the rest in our books if we wanted to do so. We built our own, obviously, because, hey, that's what we did. But it was really nice to have, because, for example, when we were drawing pictures of the bridge, we just swooped in, took an in-screen shot of it, and then threw it at the artist and went, yeah, just draw that. Done. You don't need to be creative in the greater scheme of things. Just make it look like that. Done. Artist is like, yeah, thanks.
I found all of this very exciting, by the way. I was quite invigorated to see the Ubersreich 5 appear. So
always good.
So another follow-up question I would have is that when it comes to, like, obviously we kind of mentioned it there earlier that there's a lot of passion for elves in the room.
Yes.
For you, does that predate meeting like Vermintide and Carillion and learning about Warhammer elves? Like what is it about, or was it from that moment forward that you started to kind of be like, oh, the elves in this setting are really, really cool? Or have you always been kind of enjoying elves from other fictional settings?
No, I think I might have been Team Dwarf until Vermintide. The Azrai I was so in love with right away. Sort of the emotion that I saw depicted there, the way that connection to the natural world was made to feel a little more gritty and grounded in some ways. I'd always found Tolkien elves to be a little distant. I found them hard to relate to in that way. Like, even when Warhammer's elves take on these aspects of the divine, they operate in a way that sort of exists in this literary realm, let's say. It still feels like there's this connection to the ground. I feel are easier to relate to and involve with emotionally. It's just that's the sense that I get. So
I think that's actually a really good way to put it. I think I've had a similar experience as well, of that Tolkien's elves for me have always felt very they kind of have that more almost like angelic vibe.
That being said, that's almost like we planned this. What are aspects of Warhammer fantasy that you think modern fantasy games or fiction like Tolkien could learn from?
Yeah, let's call him up. He should learn from this.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, I think that I think that the breadth of the setting does a lot for it. Honestly, it's hard to do this in a fantasy game a lot of the time, but I think that the way that different elements of the setting interact can do a lot for verisimilitude and lends it a very special kind of depth. Even the sort of secluded factions and elements of the setting have these deep running, often historical connections to other corners of the world and other peoples, and well-developed philosophies and worldviews that can create a lot of interesting tensions when bouncing off one another. So I think that commitment to development and then research and then development throughout the history of the setting has been one of its greatest strengths and will continue to be so. Beyond just the breadth of the thing and how it's connected in many different ways and kind of sensibly can be connected because of its strong historical foundation that we've already alluded to. The way that things stay kind of grounded to character does a lot for me. Personality coming through strongly in all cases is a big deal. In 4th edition, we have a lot of character bios, patrons and nemesis and things that I think are fruitful at the table. I think that they're useful for GMs to have these strong character personas that evoke certain elements of the faction they might belong to or the people they've come up alongside. That kind of thing is really valuable, I think, especially for running a game, especially for writing your own material that fits with the setting and feels right, which is important.
Yeah, agree completely.
Yeah, I one of the things that I've always found that I enjoy about Warhammer Fantasy compared to other settings, and I think this has a lot to do with like how Warhammer Fantasy got developed, where it's like so many, dozens and dozens of writers have worked on it over the course of a long period of time. Of that, they often we tend to rely almost more on building the universe around groups of little characters as opposed to having more of a world history approach, where you would usually get that with, I think, like a single author, where it's like once, not throwing daggers at Tolkien by any means, but where you where you have like someone come in, and when they're building their setting, they often will build it from kind of almost that very zoomed out God perspective of this is how everything develops, this is how the nations develop, yada, yada, yada. Whereas Warhammer Fantasy, because of just, I think due to the nature of how the novels are built and they're trying to relate it to your tabletop minis and all that stuff, it tends to have such a zoomed in perspective on what people are thinking and doing and how they're flawed and how they're just living life, which is interesting. But yeah.
So with that one, and given where we were, how do you balance the more high fantasy side of High Elves, of which there is a great deal of high fantasy? Just take a look at Safri with its floating castles and giant magic tower et al. With the grounded, often brutal realism of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay's tone, this also to a degree speaks to what Sotek was discussing about there, with the zoomed-in view that you often get with many of the novels or the games, in comparison to the top-tier voice that you often get with, say, the war game, where it's just, this nation does this, this realm does this. How do you think the pair should be balanced, if indeed you think they should be?
Well, I think the balance should be a little bit different, right? Because the kinds of grit you get in the realism are a little bit different when you're talking about an elven society, right? There's less literal filth, more perhaps internally disguised filth. But it's important to explore that side of the setting. Like, we tried to have certain locations in Cothique that spoke to perhaps the underside of Elven society and the way that manifests, which is quite different than it does, I would say, in human cultures. But you see interpersonal tensions, you see betrayal, corruption in different forms that might be common elsewhere, greed, envy, all of these things. And I think that tying those deep emotions to the sources of corruption, and which remains a very important theme in the setting, is how things can corrupt, how you can fight back against corruption. That's the point of balance, is to find where those are expressed in a society that in many ways might appear at surface level to a human visitor to be perfect, because it's not, and it shouldn't be. And the way that's explored just changes when you're in a society that prides itself on attempting to maintain purity, especially in the face of their dark cousins and so on.
Yeah,
quote unquote dark.
yeah, quite. This question always interests me, because I remember when we were sitting down discussing what we were going to do with Fantasy Roleplay 4, and talking in particular with Graham, who had been responsible for setting up Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, all the way back in the 80s, in the late 80s. And back at that point, there was no concept of high and low fantasy. It didn't exist. It's a more modern contrivance. And when they were discussing it back then, they had a very clear term that they had for what Warhammer was supposed to be. And that was grubby fantasy. And grubby was something that was taken pretty much hand in hand throughout everything that we built from that point onwards. And it doesn't necessarily, as you say, mean physical grub. You don't wander up to the great tall white towers of anywhere in Ulthuan really and go, well, that's grubby. It just doesn't quite fit. But the elves themselves, the great emotional conflicts that are going between the houses and all the rest of it, can very much express that grubby nature of fantasy well, even when it may have what many would see as a proper high fantasy setting with soaring creatures through the sky and dragons and whatever else there might be, and magic helping doing half the stuff that they've got on hand. It feels very high fantasy in comparison to, say, the very low fantasy you might find in parts of the Empire. But as far as the original creators were concerned, it was all just fantasy. the whole lot. One gigantic fantasy realm, and at its core, no matter what, it had that grubby tone, no matter how it expressed. So yeah, nice to see that both answers are largely in the same place there. Nice.
Yeah, we definitely didn't shy away from the higher fantasy elements. We've got our flying fish and so on. We've got all sorts of spectacular magical rites happening. Love the flying fish, but
can't go wrong with flying fish. Awesome.
That is my one criticism I will level at the book is I don't have a flying fish profile, and I was like, how dare I need an expanded bestiary. But one of the things that Vera said that I actually really, really like and agree with is resisting the temptation to make it where it's like, oh, you go to Ulthuan and it's just like humans with pointy ears, right? It's like, oh, it's the same cities, the same problems, but it's like, no, from a human perspective, it's like, oh, this is like heaven. This is a perfect place that there are so few problems. When in reality, there's these corruptions or threats and issues and cultural problems that from an Elven perspective are very, very obvious. But many humans would struggle to identify them without spending a considerable amount of time there. I think it actually links really nicely into like some of the conspiracies and questions within the universe. Like the idea of like, I think it ties so nicely into concepts of why is it that elves seem to be the only Warhammer fantasy race that from birth have all of their souls doomed to get eaten by a chaos god with Slanesh just lurking there. But it's like that almost seems to suggest that there's something almost inherently wrong with them compared to the other races that don't seem to suffer from such an affliction. Which is like, if a GM wanted to, they could take the stuff y'all wrote with that and it just ties in super smoothly, which I think is just really, really, really nice and works so well.
I'm quite glad to hear that.
Yeah,
we jump in. We jump into some of the more super chats.
Yes, let's get caught up with those. Awesome Blindsaur says, awesome stuff to hear. Follow-up question.
Oops, sorry.
If Andy will not push my question
Pardon me?
out of the way.
I was trying to get out of a window and I just ruined everything, so ignore me.
Okay, so Awesome Blindsaur brings up a good point. Vera, do you have any VTuber lore briefly for the people who are they're not playing a guessing game?
You like lore here. Yeah, so I am a highly realistic creature and literally verisimilitude. Whoa, you're welcome. Thank you. We're a little high concept here.
I had to Google what that word meant. I just want you to know that.
Oh, sorry.
But I just want everyone to know that I'm the one person in the call that went, that's a word. Let me look that up. But
well, for everyone in chat thinking the same, it is the appearance of being true or real. It is not only a literary concept, but one in philosophy. It can be the truth value of a statement. It can be a lot of things. I think that's quite interesting as a writer, someone who's been interested in fiction for a very long time. I think there's power in fiction. I think that it can move people in a very real way. I'm interested in that conceptual space, and I make a lot of things. Other than streaming, I work on video games. I work on C7's productions, 4th edition. I work on a cartoon. I'm a voice actor and writer there. I do a lot of fictional things that I think are important to me.
You have a busy schedule.
Yes.
and you stream in the midst of that.
Yes, I do.
They're not short streams either. I've been watching them.
Well, right now, I am during the summer, I'm a little more flexible. I teach language during the year in high school, so I have more time to stay up into the wee hours playing video games.
I'm gonna say I've seen those 8-hour, 9-hour Resident Evil streams.
It's a really good game.
It is. So having worked on old world stuff, and in honor of the upcoming Tides of Torment DLC for Warhammer 3, is there? Do you have any thoughts about Ashlyn?
Iceland?
Iceland?
The Sea Lord
Pop Sotek
coming to Total War Warhammer 3 in the future. Do you have any thoughts on the character?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were trying to portray inter-kingdom tensions, it might be great fun. We've got a naval academy in Cothique, where they might have scrimmages of sorts with visiting navies. That could be an interesting dynamic, portray some of the inter-kingdom tensions that exist in High Elf society, perhaps using, the nice method of games and all sorts of honorable challenges to bring this across. I think it's interesting to bring in these characters who are a little authoritative, perhaps, might prefer being in their element, and pit them against the player characters and their associates they've made. I do not have any idea what their profile might be at in Total Warhammer. I have not been deep into Total Warhammer for a little while.
Nobody does, so don't worry too much about it. I think this actually does do a good lead into Parmesia's comment here of they're very, very excited to see that Cothique was actually the kingdom that went with for the book, because it being kind of one of the least explored for like the tabletop battle game, where a lot of the kingdoms have like a representative unit. Like you've got your Sisters of Avalor, or the White Lions of Crace, or the Swordmasters of Hoeth from Safari and all this stuff. But Cothique's always just kind of lurked up there, being the forgotten sad child while everyone else is getting cool narratives and story focuses. So I guess what this could lead into is, was there anything particularly challenging or exciting about getting to go to Cothique and explore it? Because it really is probably the least fleshed out of the kingdoms.
Well, I think that was a great opportunity for us to have the chance to really develop the internal structure of the kingdom and develop all of these cultural elements that are pulling partly from its history of outside contact, because Cothique is one of the most outward-facing kingdoms, both literally in terms of the old world and also philosophically in terms of how it spends its time, focuses its resources. It allowed for us to craft a lot of interesting dynamics to do with the prioritization they place on trade, perhaps privateering elements, and the less less noble elements of the population. And really, I think it was a cool opportunity, because when you think about which kingdoms of Ulthuan might want outside contact and welcome the visiting outsiders, you immediately discount the inner kingdoms, and naturally a place that's so predicated on naval trade and naval projection seems a good fit. Lothern in some ways might have been another good fit, but Cothique, because it was not as fleshed out, gave us a blank canvas to work with in some ways, and some really iconic imagery, which I think is cool. When you think of like these white spires, you think of places like Santorini that have this sort of fantastic element in the real world, this real beauty to them that's quite striking, and I think visually differentiates them from both other areas of Elven civilization and, of course, the old world as a whole. There's a lot to be done there. I'm really happy with how we've fleshed out these points of contact in the old world, the houses that we have operating in Marienburg, and the connections that those have between human traders and elven ambitions. There's a lot of material there that I think is both useful for games, especially if people are leading towards naval campaigning. And yeah,
one of the things I really, really enjoyed about this book was that I felt it took kind of like, because the army books always kind of, they had like a little segment for each kingdom. So they always talked about, Cothique's like they're adventurous and they're seafarers and stuff. But it was never, they didn't really do anything with it, as far as like, they'd always be like, but only Lothern is where like people go to be visit, which always felt a little odd. I love that it's like, well, no, Cothique is the closest, literally, to the old world. And now we see the old world has been doing what is really, really nice to see, of adding so many more islands to the setting, where we have like all of these new islands popping up that really always should have been there, but it's nice to see them being reinforced. And the idea that Cothique controls this big set of island chains that lead all the way back to like Marienburg and Talea and stuff. And it's like, they are much more active with human traders and allies and stuff, and they have their own ways of dealing with these situations, which makes the Hiles feel like more of an actual part of the world, instead of they were a little bit, in my opinion, they were a little bit, I don't know if strawman's the right word, but they were kind of pigeonholed of like, Lothern is the only part of Ulthuan that's allowed to talk to anybody else, and everything else is purely internal. And this puts a huge crack in that I think is far more realistic and really nice. But I also love that y'all made the Hiles feel like actual, like, living, breathing people of that. In one hand, they're a lot nicer to the other races, the younger races, because they have to deal with them a lot more and they have a lot more invested interests. But simultaneously, they're a lot worse because some of them become pirates and all these other things. Of that, the high elves are not good elves; they're high elves. And I think y'all did a really nice job striking a balance on that. That makes them feel like a part of the Warhammer world, which is great.
Yeah, I think there was a real effort to portray these different elements of the sort of swashbuckling adventuring culture and what that could mean, because there's a sort of a heroic glamour and nobility to this image of the swashbuckling captain, this cutlass-wielding warrior who's out sailing the seas, paving new ground, making contacts and bringing home treasures. And then, of course, there's the immediate flip side of that, where they're knocking over other vessels and portraying their deeds as those of the Druki. And all of these things could be held in one hand, perhaps. It was fun to work with. There's a lot of different corners to come at it from. We tried to represent every angle you'd come at that kind of society from, whether you're motivated by the mercantile elements or the thrill of adventure or the chance to distinguish one's name. All of that is represented in some way in the city and the setting as a whole, and the characters that live there and the intrigue that take place between them. And it was a lot of fun to flesh out. I think it is representative of sort of the different breadth of elvendom that you can find. So.
Good. We've got here Antonio ask, among VTubers in these early years, and another prophet of Sotek for the 2000 onwards, and Andy since the beginning. Wow, how the generations evolve. I don't appreciate your verbiage. That seems to indicate some severe aging among several of us. But
I didn't hear any of that.
We've got where was I? I was.
Pardon me. That's the next one.
Total War Warhammer is what taught me about the Warhammer fantasy world, says Awesome Lionsaurus, and just thanks to all three of you for your various contributions to it. Oh, well, thank you, Awesome Source. Appreciate that.
Oh, yeah.
And make sure that if you do, to buy Dark Deeds, subscribe on Vera's Twitch channel, and send me money. Any and all of those are great.
Buy Dark Deeds. It's a great game. Anyway, yeah, sorry, pardon me. I may be touting.
Please throw money at all three of us. We appreciate it. Please and thank you.
Always.
Antonio says,
thank you.
all of the elves. In the meantime, I drank my noble Breton, accompanied by a good wine. Stupid elves killed those peasants. Hello from the Italian vampire general. Well, hello to yourself.
Hi. You also missed the Lionsaurus comment there.
Oh, yes, I did. Follow-up question. As someone who loves high elves, can you, Vera, share some tidbits about the Seaboards of Cothique book, as far as how was it working on the book, or any elements of the lore that you were involved with, anything that you are comfortable sharing?
Yeah, so I worked on both the player's guide and the GM side of things, and I did a lot of thinking about like Elven culture and society as part of this. There was a lot of consideration placed in how the Elven mentality would show up in the books, how the different Aesir there might express their take on what it means to be an elf and what it means to be a good elf. I thought a lot about purity and potential sources of corruption and what is acceptable in Elven society and why. We had a lot of discussions about how intrigues might play out and what might motivate them, how perhaps the worst of the elves might gain some kind of hold, how to connect that to future dramas in the setting and material, some of which pulled from the end times and how things wind up there, perhaps predicting that earlier on. It was an interesting thing. Because the setting had not been fleshed out in this corner so well, Cothique was described in like broad terms. We had a lot of room to play around in, and I think we wanted to simultaneously provide the real image of a lived-in Elven city that is properly meeting that standard you would hope for from one, with all the beauty that includes, but also to give places to adventure in the surroundings of it, places for perhaps martial combat out in the foothills and so on, and of course make these gritty nods to the worst elements of being a person, perhaps being an elf. There's a few places that travelers might go missing, or that executions might take place. All of these things are present. It shows a wide swath of the society, I would hope. And it was interesting to try and find places to show that not quite humanity, but the breadth of experience.
Nice. Blue Oysters Cultist says, dang! Is every Warhammer writer stroke game designer a Tolkien hater? No, not at all. It's just me. Why? Is it because he came out of the verdant trenches a grumpy man? And I'll just quickly answer on that. No, I'm not a hater. It's just I have lots of other books that I prefer. We all have tastes, and it's okay to like one thing over another thing. But the strong belief that Tolkien is the father of modern fantasy is something that just sort of grinds my gears a bit. He's certainly a deep influencer, but he is not the only name that we should be bringing up.
Yeah.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I quite like Tolkien as well. Just I don't want to write in his setting.
Yeah, me too. I'm exactly the same place.
For me, I enjoy Tolkien, but for me, he tends to be very well known amongst just like the common zeitgeist. So he's often a very useful reference. So that's why I often will use him as a reference so that I can give people something that they know to then lead them in a direction on a various topic. So it will sound like I'm just like punching his grave as much as I possibly can, but it's just because he's a reliable frame of reference to then go out from. It's not that I have some personal vendetta against him, I swear.
Unlike me. I mean, sorry.
Rock says, thanks for the stream. Can you please give me any advice or things to keep in mind when I'm writing or playing characters such as elves who have such long lives in order to give them that feeling of the weight of having lived for so many years? Vera, you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, sort of the cop-out answer is maybe don't play an elf who's been around for several thousand years for a couple of reasons. One, most characters like that will be exceedingly powerful and probably outside the bounds of your starting characters. It is a little odd for an elf who's been around for millennia or even since the Sundering to be in the same party with a rat catcher. This is where the problems begin. Beyond that, I think that trying to solidify what their guiding mentality is can do a lot. I like to think of elves as sort of connected to certain aspects of religiosity, certain corners of the pantheon, and that can provide a nice touchstone for their mentality, perhaps. I think it's useful to think about their upbringing and the standards to which they are held. I think it's useful to perhaps acknowledge they might not remember everything that's happened to them in several hundred years. Less important things might fade over time, but traumatic events, or particularly portentous ones, might be very strong impressions.
I've got a few things I'll add then. Age. Age brings many things. It's not always wisdom. It should be. I mean, I'm wise, obviously, but everyone else might not be. What age does, though, is it always brings experience. And experience is something that affects all parts of your lives. When you try something for the first time, it's uncertain. It's possibly scary. You might be very concerned about how it's going to turn out. You get deeply caught up in all the minutiae and the detail because you are doing this for the first time. You want to do it right. And this applies to almost all aspects of your life, ranging from your first kiss to your first attempt to get a job to your first at anything. When you're old, those firsts are history. Those big things and little things in all aspects of your life have been done. Very little shocks you anymore. And as decades turn to centuries, the reaction to events are just different because you've done it all before. The difference in my quality of life and understanding of life in comparison to my daughters, who are just on the cusp of being 19, 20, around that area, is stark. They turn to me and they can ask me a question about anything and I have an answer because I've done almost all aspects of life up to being 20. I've done all of those things for a first time. I understand how everything works because I've done it and I also know where I went wrong and right, so I can hopefully provide advice. But if you've done it 1,000 times, then your quality of not just advice, your quality and appreciation of life is completely different. And it's one of the big things that most people who write age get wrong. They make them react in the weirdest ways, like they didn't expect this to happen. The classic one is vampires in movies where they rage! Ah! How could this occur? How could you betray me? Hell, it's been 700 years. You've been betrayed 1,000 times. You're not going to be doing that. Now, if you personally had something that had to happen at a particular point, perhaps, but the betrayal and the rage is going to be entirely directed elsewhere. Perhaps it'll be internal. How the hell did I have this happen to me again? Time brings experience, which means they will react very differently. And there's 1,000 things. I could run entire masterclasses on this topic alone. But if I was going to say one thing you should always keep in mind is that they have been there and they have done it, and they're much more relaxed about the world in general because they know what it is. Now, that doesn't mean elves as a species are relaxed. We all know that they are hyper-emotional, in-the-moment creatures, depending upon which version of the lore we go with, but they tend to be very emotional, striving to hit some form of balance in their lives. But that doesn't change the fact that they still have this great depth of experience that they're drawing from. So I'd take that into mind if you're attempting to write someone who's a little bit more on the hoary, grey-beardy side of things, rather than the far more young VTubery side of things.
What I would suggest myself is that keep in mind that the longer you live, the more baggage you carry. Of that, you have physical injuries, you have emotional injuries, you have mental injuries. Yes, yeah. So when you're designing your character, make sure to think about some of like the traumas, both physical, emotional, and mental, that your character has been through, and how especially if you're going with an elf and you're leaning into that a much more emotional version of how you remember those events. So maybe like with humans, how, like if something has happened in your past, we're designed with some good and some bad aspects of that. Often humanity.
I don't dwell.
Yeah. It's like, humans generally don't remember pain, right? Like we don't remember how painful something is most of the time, but we often remember emotional pain very, very well, almost too much. Because our brains are trying to have this survival bias of avoiding experiencing those kinds of things again. So you might, if you're wanting to make sure your character doesn't end up being like just the old Gandalf in the room and like, oh, he's so good at everything and he doesn't have any flaws. Work on the flaws of what are the things that he's really traumatized about? What are the things that remind him of old hurts, of old discomforts, of things that make him him or them, she or whatever, what makes them uncomfortable? What bad things have they gone through that they would do anything to not have to go through again? Because that will make them have very different struggles that your younger PCs might struggle to relate to, which causes interesting party conflict.
Yeah, remember the old people are stuck in their ways? Because as they get old, there's a reason for that. It's not just they've got experience and that experience lends them to think there is a correct way to do it, although there is. They also have experience of pain, which means that there's a host of things they want to avoid. And you often find younger folk, they turn to older folk and they attempt to convince them of one way or another, and they find themselves hitting a brick wall. They tend to back off. That's also an important consideration in terms of not just how you consider these characters and building them, but how they react. They're far more stronger in what they think, and they will very quickly push people away who think differently to them. And this is a core component of just age in general inside human society. So taking that to an extreme version on your elves in no way will turn up with bad results. So they start out with different ones. It's not necessarily the only way you should do it, but definitely keep it in mind.
Yeah, and I would say that to some extent, these differing effects that the age can have are represented in some way through the ennui philosophy from the previous book. The different extremes of that, where you have your ennui, you have your detachment, and you have your extreme desire for something new on the other end. Like you can draw some inspiration from those ends of the spectrum, not necessarily just as part of tracking your character's mental state, but also in predicting the ways they might have reacted to things in the past, the mentality they might have overall, what they're trying to keep balance between.
Also, if you're worried about stats or anything, don't be afraid to give yourself injuries that never healed right.
Yeah, I'm straight.
Life happens and it sucks.
Doesn't it just?
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Yeah. But for Isia, according to your opinion, what types of aspects? This is an interesting question. So, Vera, is there anything you think should be adjusted or deleted from High Elves to try and make them more unique and Warhammery? That's an interesting approach to that question.
I'm not quite sure. I think that the way that they come across is quite Warhammery because it's at the heart of Warhammer. It has been for a while. Like they've defined a lot of Warhammer. Warhammer's history is a story of elven hubris.
I think in some respects what they're suggesting here is what should be deleted from the concept of elves as a whole to make them high elves. And Warhammer. That might be better because you can't really delete anything from what as being a high elf to make them as unique and as Warhammer is. I mean, different question.
I think. You know what? I'm going to do this. Charisma, I know you're in chat. Why don't you clarify a little bit, and we'll come back to this one.
Yes, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let's do that. Colbo, people often talk about Tolkien's elves as being the super perfect angelic beings, but if the Hobbit taught me anything, it's that Tolkien's elves are alcoholic. You're not wrong about the Hobbit. That is very true. But I'll note the Hobbit is a bit of a different framework than the rest of everything he wrote.
I would also say that kind of debauchery is very in line with sort of the Greek gods, right? There's this element of grandiosity that can be had in partying really hard. It's like Loak. Think about that.
That's something Warhammer Elves should actually absolutely be into. Is that
damn straight?
That's how the pleasure cults happen, man. Elves party like maniacs.
Yep.
Morton to Crescent. Some here have described the high elves are like eternal teenagers, feeling everything so much. Vera, do you have a favorite petty aspect of the Cothique elves?
Ooh, so there's this specific beat that I wrote for the Naval Academy, wherein a visiting student, a human one who's sort of been permitted to audit a few classes there, much to his esteem and the mockery of his peers, has been challenged in jest to take on a elven challenge of manhood local to Cothique. And the way it's positioned, it seems as if they won't suffer him succeeding, so perhaps the players might have to help out in some way. I like this idea of certain elements of the less welcoming elves resisting any kind of impressive deed on the behalf of visitors because they can't stand to be seen as an equal to them in any way. I think that's good fun. I think that kind of tension is exciting and quite petty.
If there's one thing I always enjoy about going back to Vermintide, how Carillion's portrayed, especially if you go back to the first game. The second game, she obviously likes the Vermintide, the Uberstrike 5 more than she did in the first game.
Yeah, more than she did initially.
Yeah, if you go back to the first game, she has a lot of very funny lines about if one of the other players is doing particularly well and getting a lot of kills and stuff. She does not give nice compliments. All of her compliments are the most backhanded douchebag things that she can possibly say. And that's very much the thing with elves. Of that, even if they're impressed, the way they express it is kind of rude. To be honest, it's just mean. They're just mean people.
For some at least. They might try quite well, but kind of be patronizing in their own way if they were perhaps being a little more genuinely kind. But
yeah, it's like you almost have a sliding spectrum that a lot of elves, I think, struggle not to be on. Not that they don't want to be on it, where it's like a nicer elf is probably going to come off more like that patronizing, doting, like uncle aunt figure that's old and be like, "Wow, good job! I can't believe you did that. Really,
you did it all by yourself. Wow,
wow."
Versus your more Carillion, like full on mean girl, where even if they're giving you a compliment, it's just like I feel worse. Even though you said something that's supposed to be nice to me. Okay, Parisma clarifying here, saying, okay, interesting. So they're asking, so for the elves that we have, with the high elves that we have, such as the way they're often, their attitude, clothing, relationship, physical appearance, etc., is depicted, is there anything that you think would be worth changing about them to try and make them more unique compared to as a Warhammer fantasy faction compared to how they're currently portrayed? So something to make them more distinct that you would do. And if the answer is nothing, then the answer is nothing, is what I'll say.
I will say I'm quite a fan of the entirely blackened eyes. I think that's interesting. I think it's an aesthetic that distinguishes them visually in a strong way. It's been used in some art and not in others. I think it's I think it's fun. I think it's also fun if it's part of Second Sight. I think that's interesting if there's physical difference that emerges as a result of magical nature. Yeah, I have my own headcanons, like things like a second set of incisors, like that. Things that I think might explain. We've been given a tooth count for elves that is different than humans by a little bit.
I did that.
Oh, wonderful. No, I love that. That is one of my favorite details in the. Okay, well.
Well, first of all, any headcanons we want to hear all about. Just because that could just help people. Maybe if someone hears that and goes, "Oh, that's cool," they could just use it for their own games.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's one of the great joys of writing Warhammer is being able to add cool additional bits to it. But you always know that when you're doing it, you're like, I'd really love to add this too, but that's not really what Warhammer is and has never been. So if I add this, I'm basically rewriting what someone else did. And I don't think I will. I'll keep it for myself. I'll use that in my version.
You know, I have to say this and this is just my opinion. No one else in the show is endorsing what I'm about to say. But all I will say is that it's very fun for me to hear how the RPG people that get to work on the RPG game are so deeply considerate about like, oh, well, that's not what Warhammer is. That's not what it's been and stuff. And then you meet writers for like the head studio. They're like, I'm just changing shit. I don't give a fuck. I'm just going in.
Well, there's a difference between being on the top level where you are literally creating everything top down. And both the responsibility and the freedom that brings to being hired in to do a job where you are now working within the framework of somebody else's world, which means that often you're not there to create from an entirely blank canvas. You are there to embellish the world that everybody already knows and loves, which means you have to be very careful that what you're creating and what you're presenting not only matches the tone of what you're writing, but also matches the tone of what everyone else has written. And you carry a responsibility to ensure that your work is acceptable to not everybody, because everyone's got their own versions of Warhammer out there, and a lot of those are not necessarily what the studio would prefer. Down at Games Workshop HQ, pardon me, but it's most certainly to appeal to what Games Workshop want their world to be. And that means that sometimes when you come up with a really cool thing and you're sitting by your computer going, well, this is awesome, you go, yeah, but that also isn't what currently Games Workshop want. Now, sometimes they love those ideas, but that's when you're in the position I was in, you could literally just pitch it directly to GW. You could just go, hey, GW, I want to do this thing. I think it might be a bit out there. Is that okay? But if you're just being brought in as a writer to somebody else's project, it's not really something that you've got the freedom to do. So you've always got to be super careful about the stuff you go, yeah, this is what I'm writing about. And the stuff that you go, yeah, this is what I'm going to put in my next game. Take a look at, just to conclude on that, the differences between, say, LAWhammer, the actual play I run, and where that goes and how crazy it goes once you get past the first 10, 15 episodes, and some of the massive changes that I make to the lore to make it make sense, while simultaneously comparing that to what I wrote for Warhammer, which is, by comparison, identical, because I don't contradict anything I wrote, but at the same point, so far beyond anything that's in the official writing to be almost a different game.
Mm-hmm. Awesome Lion says, thanks for the amazing deep answers, Vera. You rock. I'll rename one of my Lord/Heroes of my Half campaign after you. Would you prefer to be a High Elf Princess, Archmage, Mage, or Handmaiden of the Everqueen if you had to choose?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. That's so awesome of you, Lionsaurus. Second of all, I will be happy as long as I can use Shadow Magic. So, dealer's choice.
There you go. Shadow Mage.
Shadow Mage.
Espada Boy, let's go. Finally caught a live stream. Well, welcome. Unrelated, kind of. I'm pretty new to Warhammer as a whole, so I wondered, which factions are your favorites, everyone, besides the obvious Lizardmen for Sotek? Well, I mean, I no. Yeah, no. Vera, do you have a favorite?
I sure do. I like the Wood Elves, the Azrai specifically, and among them, the War Dancers.
Yeah, I've had many a war dancer in my army. So this one's almost impossible for me to answer because whenever I write for something, it ends up being my favorite because it's the thing that I'm thinking about really deeply. And suddenly you go, oh, I could do this and I could do that. And I really get very excited about whatever it is that I'm doing. So because I've written so broadly across Warhammer, and I've also played so broadly, I played literally every GW game and most factions in them, I'm left at the end of it going, they're all my favorite, which is a rubbish answer. But it's kind of true. Like, right this very moment, for example, I'm currently writing bits for my Path of the Mariner, for our version of the High Elves in our game. And I'm busy doing a bit of art for that. And it's finally beginning to look like what I wanted, with a big splash of water and a big huge swirl. And I'm like, yeah, this is the best thing ever. So right now, that's my favorite thing. So if you were attaching that to a faction, it'd be the High Elves, the Azure. But that's about as far away from my favorite faction in general that you could possibly get, because I love the Dark Elves just as much, if not more. So, is my answer.
Predator Rules ask, Vera, what are your thoughts about the best faction, objectively, apparently, the Orcs?
Lies!
I think they're big, and they're strong, and they're cunning, and they're brutal.
And they're brutal.
I think they're green, which I like.
Truly words of wisdom. Truly words of wisdom. Ricky Chapman says, Vera, if you were isekai'd into the Warhammer Fantasy to the geological equivalent of where you are now-ish, and we'll aim that as like a country, or continent, what would you do to survive? I ask every Lorebeards guest this.
You do, Ricky.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because Ricky's lovely. Ricky likes to come in and tell us what they've been up to in their Wolf campaigns. Apparently, they ran this as a campaign concept where they got teleport because they're in America, I guess. They ended up in Naggaroth and they had to eat a dark elf to survive, which, okay. Okay.
Yeah, well, I am North American myself, so that would place me in a rather dangerous location. So I think the answer is I would do anything that I could to survive.
Well, maybe
that'd be a grim possibility there.
Maybe they got an extra seat at that Dark Elf banquet.
Hopefully not as the dish.
Yeah. Yeah. Antonio, thank you for
thank you.
Curiosity, since we're talking about immortal races, what do you think would be big differences, for example, between vampires in general and elves in general, apart from the most obvious things? What would do you have any thoughts on what a discussion would be like between a creature that has become immortal versus one that has always been functionally immortal?
Well, I think that even though it is sort of obvious, the most critical difference is that vampires are inherently a predatory thing. They are a creature that sustains themselves off of life. They are inherently opposed to sort of the natural order. And that, I think, is a great point of distinction, because elves are meant to at least hold the balance of the world in quite high regard. Vampires are a subversion of this. They run in contrary to the way things should be. They are a reversal. They are sort of a black hole of life. However, as predatory things, I think they might have remarkably much to talk about with certain varieties of elves, specifically worshippers of Anoth Rema, who might see them as a sort of super creature as much as they might violate the sanctity of life, and perhaps Canaanites as well, as they are in fact murderers. All vampires are well known for their prowess in murder, no matter what variety they are.
Yeah, very good points.
But I think that vampire immortality comes as a surprise to them, for one, and that depending on the bloodline they're brought up in and the influences they have, they might view it very differently than an elf, who has a societal backing of other peers who are often quite many peers who share their experiences, and they have a lot in common with. Vampires are isolated, and all of their development as a person prior to their transformation is no longer valid or useful. In fact, it is baggage that they must discard. So I think that the experience is quite radically different in a lot of ways, but perhaps there are certain varieties of extreme elf they might have some common cause, or at least alignment with. There could be an interesting discussion there.
Yeah.
I would I think for me, what I would say is I definitely agree with everything Vera said. I also think with vampires, you run into an interesting, when you're having like a discussion between your vampire character and elf character. One of the things that you'll run into is that vampires they weren't designed for immortality, right? Like a human becoming immortal comes with a lot of issues because humans weren't meant for it. They weren't designed for it. They don't have the developmental tools that work as well as what an elf is going to bring to the table. Where elves it's not that they're many times extending their lives, they just live for obscenely long periods of time. And they would have the evolutionary, should we say, tools to better deal with it, which is something that I think your elder vampires would be less equipped to do so. But I also agree a lot with Vera that I think one of the most interesting things would be the idea of when you come from a race of borderline immortals, you have a sense of community and there is a sense of fellowship that doesn't exist for most vampires, which are far more isolated entities.
Yeah, I suppose if I'm going to answer this one as well, I'll take a slightly different angle from everyone else, because it's always nice to tackle it from different directions. And rather than going for the grounded position they have, or perhaps their physiological differences, go instead for the magical ones, where vampires are inherently laced through with dark magic, and that influences them pretty much in everything that they do, meaning that the darker, more twisted emotions that many people are aware of are their core playground. Whilst, of course, they are capable of, let's say, other emotions, rather than trying to typify one as higher or lower or any similar nonsense. They are capable of non-Dar emotions. That is not where they lie naturally. They naturally are sunk through with the more corrupting nature that Dar has pretty much centered within them. Where if we move that over to the elves, they are all working through different versions of balance in a variety of different ways. And whilst the high elves love calling themselves balanced, they still only take a certain aspect of the entire mandala of the gods. They almost refute parts of their lives in the same way that the dark elves refute parts of their lives. They're almost like two different sides to a similar coin. And the dark elves, though, they have a vast array of experience. The high elves have a vast array of experience, and they have crossover. And the vampires are sort of outside both because they're so corrupted at the core. They don't have this internal balance no matter what kind of elf they have by comparison, meaning that you have got two very different experiences with the world. This great community of like-minded souls that are working on one side, and this corruptive, caustic loner on the other. Even the ones that are surrounded by their peers are normally surrounded by their competition. And it's not just their competition in terms of, I want power. As we were discussing in another stream, power is, and politics is, nothing more than the ability to control resources. That's ultimately what it boils down to. How many resources can you control and say are yours? And resources for vampires are blood, which means that other vampires are always literal, direct competitors. Elves are often on the other side of the world doing completely different things to them. So vampires and elves, so very different. And that's good, because different experiences, they wouldn't get on.
Yep, firmly agree.
Like at all. At all.
As Andy pointed out, the high elves and the dark elves are like two sides of the coin, but the Azrai, the wood elves, are no better here, because although they are sort of in the center of that as well, they are bound to the weave and the order of the natural world, which a vampire inherently perverts. So maybe we can think of it as like a diamond here. They're opposed to everyone somehow.
Yeah, the only I think the only like time you really get to see much of like vampire elf having reasonably okay conversations is if you ever want to check, for anyone that wants to read about it, the Neferata books by Josh Reynolds has a notable Neferata has a dark elf lover for a portion of the book. That, and it's fun. It's fun. It revolves
I
around,
can definitely see that working too.
Yeah, it revolves around the Sartosa storyline.
Yep.
From there, why don't we hop into, this is a good question, I think. So is there any aspects of Ulthuan's culture or history? And, you know, I'm going to expand this question to actually just Elven. So not just high elves, but we can include other elves as well. That you think is most overlooked or misunderstood by fans in your opinion? I know it's a biggie.
Most overlooked or misunderstood. That's tough, because that draws from like what I would see as like a misconception I've seen running through the community. I'm not sure I could say there's like a strong trend towards some kind of misunderstanding. I would say perhaps that the impression that people get is maybe a little too stuck up in some ways. It's just it should be more patronizing and less truly stuffy. Elves have a wide range of experience. They
so like a little too much focus on like British aristocrat type
vibe.
Yeah.
I think that perhaps this impression is that elves are perhaps a little more genuinely refined in all ways than they are. They have a nobility to them, but like even in Aletha Nar, we see all sorts of trysts and adventurous experiences. They're getting up to all sorts of nonsense. It's not an entirely formal society by any means. Elves can be tongue-in-cheek. They can be quite bold. They want to present themselves surely as these perfect beings, but are very much not that.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good point. Especially with the High Elves, I actually would say is I think a lot of people think of them all as the super shiny, squeaky clean guys with the big pointy helmets. Where there's actually a lot more nuance of like your sea elves or your especially like Cracians, like your white lions are significantly different culturally, and they're more like rough and tumble. They're more like rural folk. That have a lot of different cultural designs, and they're going to appear very different. That's why I always was like such a big fan of like Corhill from the Army Books special characters. Of that, Corhill is often talked about of that he's from a non-elven perspective is perceived as being so much more friendly because he has a very down-to-earth, doesn't really do the intrigue stuff, doesn't really bother with it. He's more of almost kind of what you could almost describe as like a peasant type person where he's far more just what he is on the surface as opposed to having like all these intricate layers that are usually built up with elves of like, oh, they have these intricate webs and they're very haughty and have their nose turned up and everything. But that's, they're individuals. They're not a monolith species, which I think is a trap that seasons fall into.
I'd say that's the big thing I'd sum it with as well. High Elves are not a monolith. They are a multitude of different cultures, all from one part of the world. And it's a very, very big place. And whereas outside, they look towards the High Elves and they see this great wall, this great shifting isles, I suppose, but this great wall of High Elves, and they tend to characterize them all as one thing. That human empire perspective has leached into not just many of the players, but also the writers, where they view the High Elves as a monolith. They view the Dark Elves as a monolith. They view the Wood Elves, which of all of them, they really shouldn't, because the army lists are very clear they're not. But they view the Wood Elves, the Azrai, as a monolith, and they absolutely are not. And I think one of the key jobs whenever elves are coming to the table is to try and show all those different cultural norms, to try and show key differentiators and help the players understand that people are different within that great monolith that they almost certainly probably internally realize without being aware that they're doing so. And a lot of that is because almost all of the material that we've had for the elves has been from the war game. Almost all of it. And the war game is all about big picture stuff. And it's all about, in many respects, monoliths. It's all about attempting to make very clear what the pillars are for this society so that you can immediately understand it and get a quick grasp before you start painting yourself a quick miniature. Where the roleplay game is on the flip side, it's all about trying to portray lots of different people from this culture and then realizing that it's a multicultural place with 10 kingdoms, all of which are deeply culturally different with different beliefs, different understandings. And as far as the elves are concerned, different dialects, different appearances. Individual elves can look at elves from other places and go, oh, that one there looks like he's an Avalonian. I mean, he comes from Avalorn, where outside it's just, they're all elves. What are you talking about? They're just all so pretty. Look at them with the little eyes. And there's cultural differences, yes, but there's also physical differences. Now, whilst the physical differences for Games Workshop's elves are not often focused on, say, for example, skin tone and color to any great degree, they are definitely still there. And it's something that, as writers, we should always be there trying to pick up the little bits of nitty-gritty so that people can go, ooh, oh, that's a nice detail, and that's a nice detail. And I try to incorporate that into my game so that we can just show that there's a reason the High Elves are constantly so fractured, and it's more than just they're political, because that means nothing.
Let's see. Formicia says, if I'm allowed to ask a side question, of course. Oh boy. For Vera, would you have any ideas on how to create the Shadow Elves of Malarian for Age of Sigmar? Is there anything you would really want to see with them when and if they're brought to the setting?
Well, I am quite an Ulgu enjoyer. I like the Wind of Shadows, and I think that the most important thing would be to stay true to the essence of that wind, sort of the attitude and aspect of it, right? Which makes this a hard question to answer, as a matter of fact, because inherently that means a lot of mystery. I think that preserving that sense of confusion and opacity would be important. You'd want to maintain this sense of mysterious darkness, right? It's a challenge as a writer to stay true to that very deliberately confused and hard to read truth, quote unquote, to the aspect of shadows without totally dodging giving any usable information. So to do so on the spot is a bit of a challenge. I think that sort of befuddling should be the opposite of a guiding light, though. You want to make sure there's room for interpretation, room for mystery, and that aspect to like really shine through strongly. I think that's the most crucial thing.
Inscrutable.
Yes.
Yeah, they are difficult to pin down, and I think that might be something that could be a core component of bringing them about, because the immediate first thought is, well, it'll be just like Dark Elves, right? They'll be just like Dark Elves, because a lot of people will just look to copy paste and not bring something new to the table, because that's the easy thing to do. And it certainly involves a lot less thought. Where if we're looking at the Grey Wind, when we're looking at Ulgu, when we're looking at shadows, when we're looking at everything that is represented there, the inscrutable aspect of it is entirely in contrary position to Dark Elves, because they're really scrutable. I mean, in terms of the great things that can be scruted, they are definitely high on the list of scrutation. We all know what...
I feel like you're taking this word to as far as it could go.
I'm cool with that. But they're really, really easy to read, predict, and generally expect. Now, sure, sometimes they do surprising things and they have unexpected alliances or whatever, but in the greater scheme of things, Dark Elves are bloody Dark Elves. And I think that's what you'd want to do. You'd want to create something that was new, unique, and slightly unexpected, so that that inscrutable element should suddenly come to the fore, where people just aren't certain anymore. Just going copy-paste with Dark Elves, I think, would be a lazy way of resolving it.
I think it would be ideal to introduce sort of a sense of unease as to their motivations, both as a whole and on an individual level, because you can, in fact, predict the Dark Elves' motivations. Most of them are motivated by the same things. In direct opposition to one another.
What's that Dark Elf doing with that knife over there? Surely he's not going to stab me with it, says man who was stabbed. I'll
be fine.
Yeah. For me, I just hope they're weird. I just want to be super weird. The way I would put it is I would like to see them take the term elf and see how far they could stretch it without breaking it.
Maybe add an extra letter.
Yeah, that'll do it. But for me, it's like, Idneth Deepkin, they're fun. And they do some weird things where you have like the thrall types that don't have eyes, right? Like there's just flesh. There's no eye sockets or anything. That's cool and creepy. The Sylvanet, you have like their part tree spirit, part elf type thing, and whether or not they're even an elf faction is hilariously a matter of great debate within the community, even though as far as GW is concerned, they are elves but don't have elf keyword. Stop asking us questions. So I hope the big thing is they just get weird with it. Nils asks, do you think elves are more concerned with long-term problems than present issues like humans tend to be, in the sense that humans are very focused on the now? Or do the emotional natures of elves make them bicker on very, I'm going to rephrase this as like small present things? So like, would they be more worried about long-term, like to compare to our world? Would they be like, oh, we're going to focus on climate change because that's a very serious issue, even though it's a very long view issue? Or would they be much more focused, in your opinion, on very narrow, petty things that are happening right now problems?
Well, I think it's important to remember that to an elf, what's considered a long-term problem might be very different than to us. Remember that psychologically, at least for humans, time seems to pass faster as we have more and more experience. And for an elf, a matter that takes a few hundred years to resolve might seem not too far off.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, take a difference between just the human experience, and I thought that was a good way to answer that question. As you grow older, time seems to pass a little more quickly, and your concerns grow a little more long in terms of what is short, what is mid, and what is long term. As a child, you're often worrying about what you're going to do the next day with your friends, and that's about it. What's happening next year as an outcome is so beyond your concern that you don't even really bring it to mind even. It's just not what you're doing. But as you move into your teenage years, you're now being thrust upon repeatedly with, well, take that as you will, with various people saying, hey, it came out the way it came out. I'm living with it. Yeah, quite. Let's just move on swiftly. People are telling you things like, what do you intend to do when you leave school? What is your next steps? How are you going to progress in your life? And your life is being constantly bombarded with next term decisions that are going to be settling down over the next year or maybe two. And when you're thinking about, oh, do I go to university, or do I go into work, or do I go into college, whatever it is that you individually do, that is a long-term decision, and it's often not more than a year away. The idea of what you're going to do at the end of university is beyond your concern, beyond, I suppose, I get a job, but it's not something you're making long-term plans towards. But you're already significantly ahead of where you were as a child, where you were thinking about tomorrow. And then take it for me, for example, at the moment, I'm thinking about, do I want to build a studio outside? That's going to take a certain amount of time. Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? Most of my concerns at the moment are like 2, 4, 5, sometimes even 10 years in the future, sorting things out for my kids long term, so that by the time they reach that point, it's all ready for them. I'm in a completely different place to what I was before. Elves have that, but to a significantly bigger degree. And thus, my answer is not necessarily going to be what you think. And my answer is going to be, it varies. And it doesn't just vary because of the age of the elf and their individual concerns. It also varies because many elves, unlike a lot of immortals in a lot of settings, many elves in Warhammer are in the moment in a way that other species aren't. They're caught in the moment with their personal concerns, their emotions that are higher in general than any other species. If you're going to nail down a single thing about elves that's really different to all the others, it's not just their long life, but they are very emotional. Now, I'm not just talking, the 40k ones because they birthed Slaanesh, because of their high emotions, but it's been copy-pasted back in between 40k and Warhammer too many times not to be a thing. Just go read some of Gav Thorpe's novels and you can see it. Their emotions are peak, and it's also what allows them to live for such long times and never reach that point of ennui and boredom that is so prevalent in most other fictional versions of long-lived creatures. It's relatively rare that elves get bored because they're so emotional and caught up. Unlike, for example, humans who, for their third or fourth kiss, start going, I think I know kissing now. 9, 10, I'm going. Kiss 100, and it's like, yeah, I'm kissing. Yeah, it's just a kiss like anything else. Humans get bored. Where elves, every kiss is the first kiss. Every kiss. Everything is fresh for the first time, which means that they also have a short-termism that's really very different to the human experience. And that's something that I think if you're trying to figure out how you portray your elves differently, take that on board. It's not just, yes, I live forever, so I thus think in century-long gaps. That's all I'm considering. They're also thinking about the very next moment, the moment they're in. It's frustrating because they get more frustrated than everyone else. They get more happy, they get more sad, they get more a little bit everything than the other species, which is one of the reasons why others, when they look at them from the outside, go, well, they're really haughty, they're really this, they're really that, because they're misreading all of the elven extremes that they themselves are trying to bring into balance, that they're trying to center within their core. So I'm going to say both. It varies by elves and their age, and the older you get, you're going to have different forms of what they consider to be long-term, but also elves are much more in the moment than most people realize.
Yeah, what I would say is this is actually, I think, a really good example of how to point out a difference between dwarfs and elves. Is that for dwarfs, you deal with, they have a similar idea to human of that they cool off with age, right? Like they still have their moments of getting,
they cool off even more though.
It's like they can still get incandescently angry, but their emotions are much more reserved, and they're much more capable of seeing big picture. Like with dwarfs, they are much more likely among the various species to take on these absurdly long construction projects or look at things in the 100 or 1,000 of year span, even though most dwarves don't live for more than like 300-400 years. So you'd think they wouldn't be thinking in thousands of years, but they do because they just cool off more and more and more as they get older. Whereas with elves, they manage to avoid that because they maintain that really strong sense of emotions that keep life bright and colorful. Unless you're dealing with particular kinds of elves that get like super narrowly focused into something, which is when we get our elves that are out of balance because they've like super focused into one of the gods or are walking a particular path. And those elves might end up being really weird in this by an elven standard of that. They're not bored per se, but they can come off as unhealthily detached from everything that's going on around them,
or attached to something else,
overly attached,
quite
one particular thing. Where like if the only thing they care about is something that takes thousands of years, they ignore everything else to their detriment.
I want to bring up just one comment because I think it's actually central to this. Okay, we just talked about how everything is the first time, but like 1 or 2 questions ago, we said age makes 1,000th time not a big deal. How do we marry these? By being an elf.
Well, if I might venture to say, that immediacy, that sense of import, that sense of freshness has to do with emotional attachment. It has to do with what's important to the elf in question. Something that they don't care about might wait a few years. Why not? They have the time. Everyone does. I think it's a personal thing, whether something is going to have that real connection, import for them, right?
Yeah, I agree completely. And are we okay there? You want to go?
I'll add very briefly to make it relatable to us humans is if you have ADHD and you're like, I need to clean this room. I need to vacuum. Oh, look, video on YouTube. And then you're like, oh shit, it's time to go to bed. Well, imagine that, but it's like 50 years past.
I mean,
and you're like,
is it ever time to go to bed? There is a big difference between boredom of having done something for 1,000th time and experience. And I think that's the key difference there in the point that you brought up. I forget your name. Was it Tohu Vavahu or Vahu?
Yes.
Good. Well, I can't believe I almost remembered that.
Yeah, very nice.
I was pretty close there. Apologies for absolutely mangling your name. But the core of it here is having experience about it doesn't in any way mean that you're not going to get emotional attachment to the thing that you're doing directly in front of you. And in many respects, it shows the difference between the elves and, say, dwarves and humans. Dwarves, if anything, have a far deeper and longer attachment to everything that they're doing in a way that elves don't and that humans don't. It's very important to try and keep the species different. Try not to just make them humans with pointy ears or humans who happen to be short with big tummies. Try to actually give them deep differences in their mental psychologies, their physical physiologies, and how they reflect the world, and also perceive it. Elves perceive things in a way that's so very different to humans. Their eyes are sharper, their ears are sharper. They're capable of seeing things that humans never can, appreciating details that they don't. They walk into a human house and they see all the dust that the humans already polished and thought was clean, but they see it all, and their standards are basically higher. Because they see more, they can smell more, they know if something's being cleaned in a way that a human doesn't. A human walks into a room, goes, this room's fine. An elf walks into the same room and goes, wow, a dog shat in here 2 hours ago and someone didn't clean this up very well. It stinks. Okay, and the human comes in, their nose, simply less sensitive, goes, no, it's been cleaned up well. And it's not that elves are prissy, it's just that elves have a different set of standards because their actual ability to perceive things are different. Dwarves are the same. Dwarves don't smell certain things that humans do. Dwarves smells other things that they do. They've got senses that are designed for underground, so their experience is different as well. And trying to bring that to your expressions of them at the table will hopefully make a bit more sense for why the stereotypes evolve. The elven stereotype of being prissy and haughty is just simply they perceive the world differently and have higher standards and different standards to the other species. And if you take that all into account, that'll hopefully help ground things a little bit better for how you're portraying them.
To follow up one other thing you said, Andy, about the relative, like, how far in the future you look at different stages of life. Beyond psychology, I think that has to do with agency, because as a child, you might have no ability to determine anything beyond what you do tomorrow. And then as a high schooler, you have like a little more independence when you're looking for a job. And then once you have a job, you can plan your 5-10 year plan. For an elf, they might have the ability to envision something they want to have happen in 300 years and the capacity to see it carried out step by step. So that makes their concern a more tangible one.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think agency is a beautiful thing to bring into that, particularly when you start combining the differences between the species. Elves who get emotionally attached to things in a different way to humans. And they could not only have the agency to bring something about, but gain a deep attachment to the idea of bringing it about. Meaning they're far more involved with things that humans will look on and go, why is he so obsessed about this? It's not happening for like 100 years, man. This is like so beyond what you need to be worrying about. They're sitting in the corner going, shut up, dude, I'm planning.
I
Aquila going.
Yeah, I actually love that comment, Vera, because that makes me think of just differences of people, of the kind of the quirks among humanity that you can use to inspire how elves might be. It makes me think of like how some people might feel about a person that I know, those people that they're really into gardening and they're really into plants, and they're like, yeah, I've got this plant in my house that blooms once every 20 years, and I have to make absolutely fucking sure that I'm here in the house when that thing blooms, or I'm going to kill someone. And most people look at that person and go, someone needs to help that man. That man has problems. Who cares? It's just a plant.
The man has priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So I think there's a lot to say there. And also like the idea of what Andy was talking about, think about when you're dealing with someone who has like really strong sensory differences. So we have there are a lot of humans, people in our world that have sensory disorders where their senses are more sensitive. So like for most people, if you're in like a school and they've got those overhead obnoxious white lights that hum, I forget what they're called, but like the really obnoxious hums that
fluorescent.
Fluorescent lights that every goddamn public school had when I was growing up, at least. For most of us, they were fine. But one thing we learned as we did more research on kids, especially, is that there are a number of people that are really sensitive to them. That the little hum they make bothers some people that just have more sensitive hearing, or the way that they tend to kind of flicker messes with people that have more sensitive eyesight. So there are things that will bother your various species that would not bother humans, for instance.
Yeah. And I think this is a lovely one. I mean, aging in humanity has many similar issues where as you grow older, you hear less, you taste less, slowly but surely all of your senses drop. And it's a really good way to see the difference between, say, an elf or a human is to take someone who's very young and can hear high-pitched sounds, play a high-pitched sound in a room, and see how they enjoy sitting in that room in comparison to the older person who's in their 50s or 60s, literally can't hear it at all, while the child is sitting there slowly going spare because they can hear this all the time. And that, in many respects, is the difference between all of the species in Warhammer, not just elves and humans. They all have different experiences. And once you figure out what for your world is the differences for each of these species, it's super easy to see why elves will come off one way in one environment and someone else will come off in another. It reminds me to a degree of a conversation I was having when I was on the panels for World Amble this year in their big, huge award ceremony thing. And I was asked about how to try and characterize different species in games and different ways of doing it. And I was discussing neurodivergence in particular, because it was a neurodivergent panel. wonder why I was on that. And I was discussing how being neurodivergent is actually really quite useful when it comes to trying to figure out different species, because my baseline is different to other people's baseline. And the vast majority of other people work to a standard that I don't work to. So I'm already in a position where I can look out in the world and say, it's different. And then trying to imagine what differences I could have for species in a world, for me, isn't as big a stretch. I don't need to try to imagine what it would be like. I simply just create a different set of standards and apply, a different set of standards and apply. And it's, if you're out there thinking about how to do this, it's a good way to go. Take a look at psychology. What's neurodivergent for human is the standard for another species. What's neurodivergent or physically divergent for us is a standard for someone else. And you can immediately start going, oh, that's why my dwarfs are like this. It makes sense now. I'm providing that model and then going, so what's neurodivergence within that species? And showing what the peaks and troughs of that. Because whenever you create something, try not to create a monolith. Try not to say they are all this, because there is variance and diversity inside all populations.
That's a good thing to say. Yeah. Joe the Ogre, more ogre videos when, I don't know, man, when I get around to it. Thanks, though.
Hungry now.
Morgan Crescent.
I'm a child.
Morgan Crescent says, "I meant to study the blade, but I got caught up in this little sidebar of this niche application of this one aspect of this single breath of one wind for 200 years." Yes. Yeah. One of the things I love is that this is something you'll see in the LAWhammer if you decide to try and use some of the LAWhammer house rules when it comes to elven paths and adapting that for your game, of meeting elves that have decided to focus on developing one particular aspect of their life. And for them, it's like someone in our world deciding to focus on a particular, like to meditate or go on a pilgrimage or all these kind of things that could take a few years of your life, or maybe it could be a trade that you dedicate your life to. But to an elf, going on a pilgrimage is a multi-century journey, very likely, as opposed to, you know, that 5 years you did in the Himalayas for some reason. There's a lot to play around with there.
I love paths, by the way. I think it's just such a great concept.
I think the paths were very likely to have been one of the ways we'd have tackled the elves if I'd still been running things back then. But that's one of the reasons why I'm doing it now. When I realized that route wasn't being taken, I was like, right, I'm writing it then. Woo! And I got to have loads of fun. I'm currently having loads of fun putting that together for our game just now.
Oh, it just makes so much sense. You see it in the way that the Azrai express themselves. You see it in 40K with aspects and so on. War bands. It just makes sense to me. I get it. I'm glad it does, because it makes sense to me too.
Something that I think a lot of people don't realize when it comes to the elves specifically, which is a beautiful thing about them, is that there's been so much back and forth between the Eldar and the elves over the course of Warhammer's history that they're one of the only groups in both settings that can share information super easily. Like if something happens in 40K, you can almost direct port it to fantasy and vice versa super easily. Because that's what they did for a really long time.
Going to way back when. I remember when the 4th edition of the LAWhammer list came out. And this is going way back. And I remember when it came out, and I was like, I wonder what they're going to do with the elves this time. And what had just recently been mentioned inside White Dwarf. So we're talking, right, to show how old I am, White Dwarf number 127, where they first introduced the concept of the aspect warriors. And they first discussed the Eldar as being more than just space elves. And they started creating some really quite new, fresh material for what the Eldar were going to be in comparison to the elves, what are now the Eldari. And little aspects of that got ported right into immediately the High Elves as they first produced them. When they went up to the Shrine of Cain and they discussed around the Shrine of Cain all manner of statues to all the different aspects of Cain, including the Swooping Hawk and the Fire Dragon. And I was just like, yep, fucking right, this is great. And pretty much throughout the writing, whenever something got created in Warhammer, you found that almost no time later it got ported straight over to 40K. And whenever something new was created in 40K, it almost immediately got ported back to Warhammer for the elves only. And it's really weird just how much the elves have had this strange link constantly in place in a way that none of the other species have, including right up to the ones that many people say, well, they're just the same, aren't they? Like, say, the orcs and the greenskins is similar, because so much got ported between them. But in comparison, hardly anything. The elves are the great repository of 40k lore in the same way that 40k is the great repository of Warhammer lore in terms of exactly how the elves and the Eldar have been portrayed. While simultaneously, they are both exceedingly unique and completely different from each other. Take a look at all the more recent stuff for 40k. It's well beyond anything that the elves would do, because it's a different setting with different norms and different cultures that have been built. So it has entirely different next step processes in place. I'm not saying copy paste direct between them. I'm just saying that they have a deep underpinning relationship that if you want to use, it's not exactly controversial.
Yeah.
Yes. I would go so far as to say that, like, the further back in time you go, the more historical you get, the more applicable this is. Like, for Elven religiosity, that's pretty much one-to-one. I think it's, in fact, quite fun to take the 40k material on how the gods got along in these different fables and stories and to completely unify them. If you reconcile that with the pantheon in fantasy, you get a very clear whole picture that works quite well together and can really flesh relations between Cain and the gods and so on, and I think is exciting.
Yeah, it's fun to me of that. A lot of people are like, oh, it's like, oh, the concept of aspect warriors, I wish we had them in fantasy. It's like, what do you think a Swordmaster of Hoeth is? It's literally just an elf on the path of Hoeth, or like a Phoenix Guard is an elf on the path of Ashurin, or it's like the War Dancer is just an elf on the path of Loek. Like, that's basically what they are. It's just different terminology. Colbo says, I kind of love when elves are depicted as people who are in some ways profoundly immature in a way that only a centuries-old person who lives in a pseudo-utopia or dystopia can be.
Hey, Colbo.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Yep, they're not human, but they're people.
Yeah, I will always love like how great and awesome and everything Teclis is portrayed in the High Elf Like Army book, and then reading Gotrek and Felix for the first time, you get to Giant Slayer, where there's that scene of Teclis using magic so he doesn't get mud or anything on his clothing, and he just walks above it, and how much all the humans just fucking hate him, because for him that's just beneath him. That's just not something he has to deal with, and all the humans are just like, this fucking asshole. it's
but
great.
Again, the humans don't smell that dirt.
Yeah.
They don't. They just don't smell it. So they're like, "What?" I mean, he gets a bit of mud in him, whatever. Where to him, his olfactory senses are utterly offended by it. They're like, "Why wouldn't I avoid this if I can? You freaking idiots! How can you live in this filth?" And they're like, "What filth? I perceive no filth." Just different experiences. And the second you go for different experiences, suddenly what appears to be him just being overly sensitive and weird just turns into, yeah, I do the same thing if I experience the world like that, because I would.
Yep,
and some wouldn't care.
Yeah,
because some won't care.
It makes me think a lot about when I was studying child development programs. One of the programs you went through was they would put you through a series of activities, and they would basically strap all this gear to you to replicate certain sensory disorders. So, like making you wear goggles so that you perceive vision differently, or making things like exceptionally brighter, or making things way more, or making you wear certain textures on your skin that were very, very distracting. And they're like, this is what these kids' baseline is. Like, this is what life is like for them. And you're sitting there going, oh shit, okay, yeah, this is a lot harder. So just stuff like that. Espada Boy says, for Vera, what is a species or faction you would like to see more of in the Warhammer world? Something that maybe doesn't have much in the way of lore you'd like to see expanded on?
The Azrites, specifically the War Dancers. I think they're great fun. I think that War Dancers have been written around in some ways, because again, anything that touches on Olgu, you want to keep mysterious. And I think that fleshing that out is an interesting challenge to do in a way that stays true to that inscrutable nature Andy was touching on. But that is where my heart lies.
No, I think Loek is so interesting to me because he's one of the really rare examples of, he has a 40k counterpart, but it's not him with Shegaroth. And that Shegaroth and Loek are very similar, but also very different. And they're very unique. Whereas like Ashurin, 1-to-1 practically. Cain, almost 1-to-1, though there are some differences. But like Shegaroth and Loek are similar, but it's like Shegaroth is more of this almost creepy clown entity type figure. Whereas
I don't know.
Well, and a lot of modern interpretations, but it's more of that Harlequin aspect. Whereas Loic has almost more of it's almost more of like an ancient. It's similar, but I don't know. I don't know how to exactly express it. There's a difference there that's very odd.
I think the heart of that is that all of Shegaroth's friends are dead, and he's very upset.
Yeah,
Things are bad.
I think Shegaroth and Loic are basically the same entity. It's just they've got very different experiential histories. One has lost all of his rivals because, as we all know, Loic's a little bit. Everyone gets a prank. And they're not so much peers as rivals. And I know that's a perhaps blunt stereotype, particularly because almost certainly behind all of that is a great deal of love and affection and emotion that the entity itself doesn't truly understand until it's bluntly taken away, which has happened to Shegaroth. That has left it a far more bitter, far sadder, far more angry entity. But I think they are at heart pretty much identical, just different names for the same thing.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I very much agree that I hope to see War Dancers very much expanded on. I remember how exciting it was when 8th edition came out and they gave us the Shadow Dancer as a new hero type.
Yes.
Where they were like, oh yeah, your War Dancers they have a hero version that's even more badass, and hey, he's a Shadow Wizard. And everyone went, Oh, it makes sense. It's so cool. Their role to me, I find so interesting because they're so deeply important in Azrai society of being these like storytellers, but also almost like reminders and enforcers of morals in a really unique way. That's very, very distinctly Elven.
Yes, they are like Harlequins. And clowns in society overall serve as a marker of the boundary of acceptable behavior. They serve as moral reminders. They often exceed these and transgress to demonstrate what not to do. They party harder than should be done. They do all of these things. They touch on the realm of Slaanesh, this debauchery, this indulgence, but they channel it in a positive way. They are shielded. They are making of themselves an example in some ways, and they are offering that up as sacrament. It's very exciting. It works very well with the Loic's direct opposition to Slaanesh, and you see this in a lot of culture through human history, the way that clowns serve this moral role.
Yeah, and again, the ties through to the Harlequins of 40k become more and more clear as you look at how particularly the War Dancers have been developed, because way back when, War Dancers used to be a core component of places like Cothique. The very first War Dancers were attached to what was at the very initial formation of them, the Sea Elves. And the Sea Elves all had their own War Dancers as well that used to be aboard the ships and would go bouncing around, spinning their blades like crazy. That changed completely when the 5th edition Wood Elf Army list came out, and they pretty much grounded the War Dancers as what would become Azrai only. They are theirs, because Warhammer at the battle game level was all about giving each one of the factions their own unique identity and splitting apart the War Dancers over to the Wood Elves, ensured that they had their own unique expression for that. And then as they developed into their 8th edition incarnation, they just took on more of the Harlequin example. They moved from going away from one god, because he used to be attached to a god called Adamna Nabroinan, and moved over to Loic instead. And by moving over to Loic, they were effectively becoming a Shegaroth Harlequin equivalent, and they got written that way. And you can see how 40k, again, as we were discussing earlier, has adapted into Warhammer, and Warhammer has been adapted back, and it's been kind of cool. I really like where they lie now, and kind of agree it'd be nice to see more.
Well, I think that in some ways, the development of the Shadow Dancer opens the door to all sorts of appearances for them throughout Elvendom, because this connection to the Dreaming Wood, the Athelcalan, means that it's very possible for them to show up anywhere. Perhaps troops play in Nagaroth, perhaps troops play
Damn straight they do.
Why not? They're sacred. Yeah. They have guest right. They can beg audience. They have the right to perform, to ask for wine, to have a roof over their heads in exchange for a song and a dance.
Yeah, and I don't just completely support that. I think that's entirely supported by what the text suggests, if not necessarily states. The idea that they are passing through Elven society, providing important moral life and divine lessons to understand their greater place in the world, particularly when it comes to a point of tension, reminding all these different parties almost of their obligations as a species, as a group, their moral foundation points. And I think that's something that, yeah, the clown is there for, and it would be nice to see that developed.
Yeah, I actually want to take a quick little tangent on this because Vera started mentioning, and I just would love to hear expand a little bit more of. You were talking a bit about kind of like real world inspiration stuff of things that seem to drive that love for the war dancers, and would just if there's anything else that really backs why you have that passion for them, I would like to hear about it.
Well, I'm someone who's very pro clowning. I think it is not only an amazing art, equilibristics and comedy both. So juggling, unicycle. I can walk on a circus ball. I can ride a unicycle. I juggle. I do all of these things. I like them. I think that comedy is I think that comedy is an important thing. And can serve a really important social role as well. And I've done a lot of research in clowning from an anthropological perspective, the role that it serves in various South American and African societies, how it manifests as a important position in different cultures and societies. You see it often as a way to enforce boundaries and social norms by showing what not to do. You see it as a source of release from the tension of the everyday, as a way to provide pushback. Jesters, and the history of jesters is important. And quite intriguing. Comedians often have the ability to challenge in a way that is uncommon. And all of this is like very exciting in a campaign setting where you play this character who can push against social norms, who can challenge and be unafraid, who in some ways enjoys special privileges. We see in the Darius Hinks books, this goes away from the real world examples, but touches on the inspirations, I think, behind war dancers. One of our war dancer heroes is permitted audience to a party they really should not be at for the purpose of clowning, to make people laugh. And this is a special permission they are given by virtue of their identity as a clown, someone who brings revelry. So I think that LAWX's entire project is really interesting and ripe. I think that it makes war dancers excellent heroes. I think that this sort of Byronic character who wants to make others laugh and smile at all costs and will challenge the most evil things in the setting to do so is wonderful and heroic and very interesting. There's a lot to love there, and I think it does echo that sort of project where it shows up in human culture. Clowns are there to bring joy. They are there to teach without it being obvious that something is being taught. They are there to be the exception, to be something that stands outside the rest of society while contributing a lot to it. I find them fascinating. I like clowning in general. I grew up as a quite real fan of Steve-O, who is one of the more famous clowns in the modern zeitgeist, perhaps. He is a professionally, classically trained clown.
God, that explains so much, to be honest.
Does it now?
Yeah, what I'll say is I find that really fascinating in the lens of the Warhammer world, because it provides this. I love that offers that the war dancers showing what it's supposed to be, what its purpose and fulfillment is, and how it's such an effective, that the war dancers are one of the best anti-chaos tools, where Loek is literally the only elven god who challenges Slaanesh and gets away with it.
He's the most active. Yep.
Yeah. And how that has a really interesting reflection in like the Carnival of Chaos being this horrible chaos, but obviously a more human-centric institution that perverts it and takes it, tends to be a very Nurgle aspect, where the despair of it and the humor of Nurgle corrupts it in like a really foreboding, sinister way. Which, that would make for, I don't know if anyone out there is ever listening, but if anyone out there wants to do like a really interesting little written adventure, having a War Dancer Troop versus Carnival of Chaos adventure would be super baller.
Yeah, that could be pretty cool. And I'd say less that they're showing how things should be, and more showing things how they shouldn't be.
Yes.
It's often about taking things to extremes that look good, and realizing that they're not. And often, particularly when you're looking at, say, the clowning, or the more jester aspect of it, is taking the thing that's sitting directly in front of them and repeating it in such a fashion that makes you realize that when you continue down that path, you're going to trip like a fool off the edge of a cliff. And that's, I think, part of the components of what Loek is doing. And thus left on the ostracized because they're constantly pricking at the pride of those that are around them. So thus almost being an enemy while simultaneously showing them a truth that they need to see.
Antonio asks, it's obvious that information and knowledge about elves and Eldari, Eldari, sorry, I misread that for a second, can be exchanged. Damn it, the Skaven called them over the phone. Ah, yes, the great, I forget what that stupid device is called in the end times.
Even Skype.
Yeah. Arrow Mob. But would high elf cuisine be really bland or really strong?
So the answer to that, I think, lies directly in how you determine what elven taste is and what excites, prickles, entices, and moves the elven taste bud. And you might find that there's certain leaves that they taste that taste exceedingly what we might call mentholated or peppery or some similar sensation within their mouths that for us taste of nothing. So the answer would then be bland. Or alternatively, you might find that there's certain foodstuffs that they, to us, might be exceedingly hot, might be exceedingly flavorsome, that to them, they skim over all of that and get a different sensation out of it, which might be creamy or some other adjective of your choice, meaning that it might be exceedingly overflavored and overspiced. The answer is, I think, always for these things, either A, it's a literary device that you can use in different ways and say that they're different. Or alternatively, you can literally build it and determine what sort of foodstuffs respond in different ways for your species within your game. Meaning that the answer could be, if you want to try and characterize them as bland or spicy or whatever works best for that, or anything, because most leaves, most things that stuff is cooked out of will respond chemically within a mouth differently if you've got a different set of chemicals in there. So the answer is whatever the writer wants, mostly. And the writer at hand will make their own choices according to the type of story they're going to tell. If you take your own game, like my game is LAWhammer just now, is there an answer for that? In my game, the answer is yes, there is. Very real answers. There's difference between elven wines and human wines that go beyond just simply they taste different to the different species. They will ultimately have a underpinning reason for why. But what you do for your game is entirely up to yourself.
Yeah, I would add, think about like different species or creatures in our world, about how like most birds cannot taste spice, like spiciness. They're immune to it. They don't have those sensors on like their tongues. And it's because they evolved to be able to eat the berries and things of these plants that develop spiciness as a defense mechanism against things like us. So that they eat it and spread the seeds. The plants want the birds to eat and spread the seeds, but they don't want like us or dogs or whatever to eat it. So they make themselves spicy as a defense system, but the birds don't have to worry about it. Or how like we can process chocolate, but dogs and many other animals can't. If they eat it, they get sick and die. That elves and dwarfs would be very similar. You know, there's one of the things that often gets memed about, but this is a good example of, is like dwarf beer, about how dwarfs can seemingly drink only beer and it's like a fully nourishing full course meal that's super healthy for them. But for a human, it would kill them of alcohol poisoning. And it's because the dwarves they're just built different.
Yeah, and another one on dwarves that's worth mentioning is they are built and survive in closed communities underground, which means that they are quite used to living with each other's stinks all the time. All the time. That's their norm. Their air doesn't clean out in the same way the air does for all those surface dwellers out there, which means that if you start taking that to the next step, dwarves are used to that. They don't get used to all those acrid, sweaty smells. Pardon me, they don't get bothered by all those acrid, sweaty smells that humans do. So if you go into a dwarf hold, it's almost certainly going to smell, as far as most humans are concerned, it's going to stink. Where elves are going to find it possibly either far worse or maybe much better because they don't respond to those things. So you might find it's the humans that are super prissy about dwarf holds. And that's a really good thing to do. Stop trying to make humans the standard, the norm. Stop just saying that they are the only ones that respond normally to everything. And they are the standard. Start looking at the species and going, no, humans are on extremes as well in comparison to the other species. And you'll end up with a far more full world that will hopefully be more engaging for everyone when they realize that everything is a little bit more complicated.
Shadishian, this is actually a great question. So for Vera, and then of course for us, do you think elves are too complex for someone that is new to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay or roleplay in general?
I would say no. So long as you're willing to really consider it, because they deserve a lot of consideration. I think that playing them well requires a good deal of familiarity with the mentality that you wish to embody. My first Warhammer fantasy character was an elf because I knew I passionately enjoyed them and wanted to quite seriously take that on. So I did a lot of research, did a lot of reading, and I immersed myself in that as best I could. And I had a wonderful time and think it was an excellent lens into the setting. In fact, I would say that as a new player, perhaps this could be an advantage because it gives you a very specific corner of the universe to focus in on and use as your grounding to view everything outside of that. And possibly a ready excuse to know very little about the likely imperial setting you were playing in. So as a result, so long as you're willing to put the legwork in, it'd be a magical time, quite literally in many cases. I would recommend it, in fact, if you are passionate about them, because there is no better way to get into something than really wanting to pursue some element of it. And you shouldn't have to settle on that. Just have fun. Pursue it like wholeheartedly, do your reading, and yeah, have fun.
My answer is going to be potentially controversial. It's all made up. Okay, you can do whatever you want. It's okay. There is no wrong way to play. If you want to play an elf that's nothing like what we've been discussing, that's cool. In fact, that's not just cool. As long as everyone at the table's having fun, that's beyond cool. That's exactly what you're there to do. Have fun with your friends. And if that means that your elf happens to just be a human with pointy ears, okay, who likes chowing down on hot dogs and, plays a violin rather than, I don't know, a lute, so be it. That's cool. That's really cool because you're all having fun. However, I will now completely contradict myself and say on the other side, if you want to play an elf that hits the full spectrum that Games Workshop has offered for what elves can be, it's potentially a lot of work. And for someone who's new to role-playing, it's potentially too much to be bothered with. Try a human. We all know how to do it. Be a human. And if you want to be a human that doesn't understand the world, just come from a village. They don't understand anything. And everyone understands. Everyone understands the core concept of having grown up in some terribly isolated location and then leave there farm boy style to quote almost every fantasy book ever from the 1960s onward.
I'm going to the big city.
Here comes our hero, going on their great hero's journey towards, I don't know, defeating the great overlord from the east because we're slightly racist. And that's fine. You want to do it that way, you can do it that way too. But if you want to play an elf with the full spectrum of what the elf can potentially be, then yes, it is arguably a lot of work. But I would strongly suggest that you don't worry so much about it and that you all just have fun. And if you get something wrong, you can change it later. I mean, we're here to play games and have fun. There's no right way to do it. And trust me, there is not a single table in the world that plays Warhammer as it's written in the book. No one. Because everybody plays My Hammer. And My Hammer is the version of the Warhammer game that they have extrapolated from whatever books they have at hand, and then they present at the table. And it almost certainly contradicts one of the sources somewhere. Because that's just how we work. And that is not just fine. That's what everyone's doing. So don't worry about it. That's why we're LAWhammer when we do our game, because it's our version of what the Warhammer world offers. It's never going to be the same as the books, even though I've read them all. And I don't want it to be the same as the books, because I want to almost present a game that provides people who watch it with an alternative view for how certain things could work or how certain things could run. So they could go, oh, well, if Andy, who wrote those bits, is contradicting himself, then why can't I? And the answer is there's no reason you can't. Go do it. Have fun. Make it your own.
Yeah, what I would add is that if you want to get super nitty-gritty, to be very blunt, Games Workshop has said a comment that annoys a lot of people, but is ultimately the truest thing about it, which is that everything is canon. Warhammer is an inconsistent, goofy-ass mess. You should never get caught up on trying to be like super accurate as much as possible. Just have fun and figure out what works for you and the people you're playing with, because that's what fucking GW does. So that's as true to the setting as you can get.
If you are anal and you do want to be as perfect as you can be, that's not bad, wrong fun either.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine too.
Yeah, there's no right way to play.
And at the end of the day, Lorebeards is about giving you information to make your hammer. That's the whole point of the show.
Yeah.
So too complex, not necessarily. Potentially very complex, maybe not at all, depending on what motivates you,
exactly.
what you have fun with, what the table likes. But yeah, it's if that's where your passion lies, be an elf, do it, explore.
Yeah. I mean, I've once had an elf play Warhammer. She had never roleplayed in her life. And her elf was quite unlike any elf I have ever seen anywhere. And we had an absolute ball. Was she an elf as far as Warhammer is concerned? No! I mean, no! But did we have fun? Oh, hell yes. And that's what it's all about.
Simon, Seisman asks, as a fellow tortured Warhammer Fantasy writer, what would be your advice for writing organizations? Currently writing my version of Kislev Anti-Vampire SP. What would SP stand for?
Secret police, perhaps?
Maybe. Oh, yeah, that's
Secret police? Yeah,
so
that'll
writing
do.
organizations, yeah. So, any advice on that?
I always go to historical reference. I look at the way that these problems of organization have been solved in different societies, and I use those as a foundation to think about how perhaps different tools, the similar approaches might be put into place. So I think that doing research is always a great starting point, especially for human society. You can use that as a touchstone to build out likely methods of contact or interrelational ties, and that can be a useful guidepost for this kind of thing, especially because we certainly have all sorts of well-documented organizations in different governments over different like centuries and in different places that all do similar things, and somewhere within one of those there might be a useful point of inspiration.
That I can't stress. Read. And I know that sounds really obvious, okay, but read up on what you're writing about. You will find yourself possibly going down internet black holes that take you to the strangest places that weren't what you originally were researching. Maybe that's just me, but exposing yourself to different cultures, different forms, different norms will almost certainly not just improve the quality of the organizations you're building, but will also just improve you in general as you begin to take on lots of things that you would go, well, how could that, the number of times I've read a thing going, how could that possibly exist? How did anyone allow this thing to come to pass? Because it is horrific. And from an external view, often other people's norms can look horrific or strange or weird. And then trying to put yourself in those shoes, a little bit of empathy, suddenly makes you go, oh, wait a minute. No, I see how this is coming about now. Oh, I can see how this has become a thing. And then thinking the same for your setting, suddenly different things lock into your mind that you personally may never have conceived of if you'd just been left alone with your own thoughts. So yeah, read. Mm-hmm. Can't go wrong with reading.
I'm just going to third that. Nival, does Loek have a similar role in your opinion to authority? The goddess of pleasure.
I would say no. I think that authority is... Authority is a inherently sexual god, for one, which is a very different domain than Loek has. And also, she is more about like personal pleasure and the pursuit of that. There's a very different approach that Loek takes, which is more about community. Like a joke requires at least two people, right? Authority is sort of withdrawn and consumed in this sort of selfishness, I would say, whereas revelry connotes to me a party, a band of fellows in some way. There are some points of alignment. Authority certainly has parties thrown in her honor, but perhaps Loek claims a small piece of those, and there's room for an agent of the god to be a good influence within them.
So I think the big difference here is that Loek has had more written about him. Authorities had fuck all. So the problem here isn't that they have a similar role potentially. The problem here is that at a top level, you could easily see bridges between them that seem to make them look like they're linked. The answer to this one isn't what's the difference. It says when's someone going to write the difference? When someone going to sit down and make it super clear what authority is to elf civilization? Why the High Elves in particular have decided that authority and the core lessons of authority are something that they would personally not like to have in their lives on a day-to-day basis. But equally, they often do in darker moments or different moments turn to. Why? Why is this a thing? What's going on? A writer needs to come down and figure it all out. Now, for LAWhammer, because I'm writing paths for everything, it's answered already. I already have an entire makeup for not just what authority is, but all of the gods in the Elven pantheon and exactly where they sit and why. But that's for my game. That's not for your game. You need to figure it out for yourself. And until somebody does figure it out, the answer to this one is almost certainly no, because they're different. But then you have to say why. And sadly, we don't actually have an answer. But yeah, make it up. Have fun.
Yeah, I would say that I like very much what Vera had to say on it. And I think that would form for a very, very good foundational aspect about where to explore of, especially if you're coming at it from a high elf perspective. Think about what Vera said and think about what Andy said of why would Loic be allowed within polite society, but authority isn't? Where is the line that exists between them that's causing issues?
And also remember that elves are inherently more sexual than humans. They don't have the same issues, the same level of morals that we have. They have a different set of morals, a different set of gods, a different set of what's good and what's bad. And sexual promiscuity is often perceived to be a sin by many human populations because of human almost desire to go too far. Apparently, and thus it goes to Slaanesh. But they also have Raya as a core component of imperial citizenship, which is at its heart all about fertility, children, sex, all the rest of it. In fact, it was important that I separate that and make it a god in Warhammer again, rather than saying Talon Raya. Fuck that. Human sexuality is a core component of existence. Every single human is interfacing with their sexuality most days. Okay, to try and say that that should be outlawed because it's the realm of Slaanesh is absolute nonsense. So ensuring that that goddess was brought back into the core of the core rulebook itself was very important. We can have gods of war and not worry about Cain. Why the hell can't we have gods of sex and not worry about Slaanesh? It was a core component of that. And authority is a part of that as well on the elven side, but elves have a different moral code than humans. Decide what it is for your setting. And then slowly but surely, by making decisions about what is acceptable, polyamory being normal, sex outside of marriage being normal. I mean, just take a look at the core of how the Phoenix King and the Everqueen and their kid, and then their own individual relationships and consorts and all the rest of it. They have different views on what's morally acceptable in elven society. So they're going to have a very different view of what sex means for that. And authority is still on the outside. What does that mean? And that has to speak to what authority is offering. And it has to be something significantly more than just simply, oh, it's sex.
Yeah, a few bullets I would include in the chamber are, keep in mind that according to writers that we've had for Warhammer Fantasy, Tyrion is considered a weirdo because he only wants to have sex with Alariel. Like he's a dedicated man. He's considered very strange because of that in a lot of elven circles. So when you're working with authority, you're working with someone who takes, and not just sex, but I agree very much with Vera that sex is a very strong aspect of it. Someone that takes it to such an extreme that it's considered potentially dangerous. Of that,
but what does extreme mean?
Yeah, but what does extreme mean? Is it that you're so obsessed with your own personal pleasure that it becomes an addiction, and it's about pursuing that addiction and ignoring the costs that come with it? Because that's something that's a road you can go down, but that might not necessarily be the answer. It just depends on how you decide to go with it. But don't make the mistake of making your elves your typical United States human moralistic code. Figure out where your elves are first, then go from there.
I would also remember that each deity sort of represents one element of the elven psyche. Like even in prescribed gods are still experienced in some way in the heat of passion. Like high elven warriors whisper Cain's name in battle, right? It happens all the time.
Yep.
Yep.
100%.
Yeah, even for high elves, there is a place for authority.
You've got to remember that the high elves have, in many respects, are massively out of balance because they deny half of the mandala. The dark elves are massively out of balance. It's really easy for us as a typical human society to look at the dark elves and go, well, they're wrong, aren't they? From the balanced elf perspective, the high elves are just as wrong. They're just as weird, just as out of it, because to an elf from, say, the Sundering, they would look at both the high elves and the dark elves and go, they are denying large parts of their soul, large parts of their core makeup. Look at the high elf whispering to Cain as he goes to war. Why is he whispering? Why is he holding that within himself? Why is he constraining himself? He should not be doing that. Look at that. Dark elf sorceress over there who's denying Azurin. Why is she doing this? Why is that a core component of what they have become? They would view both the dark elves and the high elves as a degenerate species in comparison to what they were before. And you can then begin to see where the Aeonir, which I wish I'd written the Aeonir because my original conception for them when I did the core book isn't what they currently are, but at least you can see why the Aeonir would look at both the Azure and the Druchii and go, I'm willing to work with both, but both of you are really wrong in how you view the world. In the same way that the Azrai think that all sets are equally really wrong, but they've got their own attachment to the weave, which gives them a different form of detachment from the Mandela and attachment to the Mandela. So there's loads of different ways of viewing these elves, but ultimately, most writers don't think that much about it. I'm sorry to admit this, but the vast majority of the writers, when they sit down and they create a thing, just, what's my job? This. Okay, I'll read my source. They read their source and go. So that's about it for most writers. But some of us are super passionate and we get very excited about these things too. There's when you're doing your own stuff at home and deciding what the gods are, go wild. Have fun with it.
Yeah, and I don't think you phrased it poorly at all. I think we just kind of went off on a tangent to be in your defense. But
you didn't know.
Yeah, no. The answer to your thing of you've struggled with your own authority and separating her. Yeah, because there's little to work with. You have to figure it out on your own.
Sadly, the reason why it sounded like we didn't answer your question is because there's not a clear answer to your question just now, and we can't apologize for that. It's not our fault. But simultaneously, we apologize for it by saying that the real answer is you have to make this up for yourself. And if we're providing an answer, we're just making it up. And yes. I can provide you an answer that matches what I've done with authority, but that would just be my own personal choice on what I did with it. And it might not match what you'd like.
Perhaps a useful lens to view this from is sort of the breadth of the gods of chaos, because they have sort of intentionally a really wide range of experience that they can influence and draw from. So maybe the reasons that authority might align with Slaanesh and be in opposition to it are different from Loak, just as a worshiper of Eldrazi and a worshiper of Cain might be pulled on by Khorne in different ways, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, don't get too caught up on if there's overlap between your chaos gods and other gods. That's normal. That's totally natural. It happens. Like that's just the way gods work. They have a lot of overlapping domains.
Khorne, Ulrich, Khorne, Cain, Khorne. They really get very close sometimes, and that's fine.
Maybe it's deliberate. Maybe it's a good thing.
Indeed,
yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, if we go back to several of the writings on Warhammer, there's multiple instances of people saying that all the gods don't exist and there's only chaos. So there's multiple different philosophical reasons that you can come up with.
I'm not going to name names, but I have sat with official authors who've looked me straight in the face and went, all the gods are just the chaos gods in disguise. And I went, I respect your opinion. I think it's wrong.
I disagree.
That's a heck of a take. Yeah, that's
I have also been in that room, and I, fortunately, in that case, was on the side where I could say you're wrong.
Well, I've heard Andy say that in Warhammer, elves have higher natural body temperatures. Wouldn't that mean they're more sensitive to heat stroke whenever they wander too far near the tropics or in summer? Wouldn't it be best that they have magical ways to alter their own body temperature depending on which climate they find themselves in?
So I'll very, very brief here because this is rather specific here. But no is the answer, just different norms and different ranges. Just because something's a higher temperature doesn't mean heat stroke is necessarily going to be more of an issue. The source of the different temperatures was purely because elves often experience disease in a very different ways to humans, in a way that some writers say they're immune to disease. Yeah, no, they're not immune to disease. There's several examples of disease affecting them beyond just, magic Nurgle's disease affects the elves. They are susceptible to certain diseases, have diseases that are presumably largely elf only. Cats have higher temperatures than humans, and that means that cats don't receive many of the diseases humans do, but they can still carry some of them, or alternatively be communicable with certain diseases that they may not experience. And that was my foundation point when I was going, particularly because I was watching a cat lounging in my house, and I was like, yeah. Okay, oh no, wait a minute, this is making sense to me. So for the LAWhammer version and LAWhammer version only, I popped that temperature up a bit and played around with the physiology a little bit. I took some of the physiology from the 40k book, Xenology, where they discussed the Eldar, took some of that, ported some of that over because a lot of that made sense, popped the temperature up slightly, and suddenly all of the various textual descriptions of elves being immune or being not tolerant to certain things or more tolerant to others all made sense for my version. But it's a my version one only. I didn't add that to the core book. The core book, I think the only physiological difference that I definitely added beyond the immediately obvious was the teeth.
Love that also. As I said, I'm a big fan of these like little distinctions in physiology. They're super interesting. They give this sort of uncanny quality. It's great. It's great.
Yeah, I agree. It makes it fun.
Yeah.
Still loading. Vera, who's your most hated Warhammer fantasy character?
Ooh, it doesn't say fantasy. Can I? Do I have?
Warhammer.
Let me. Because I have one.
You can pick anyone you want.
Warhammer is fantasy. Don't you try. Warhammer 40k isn't fantasy.
How about both?
Okay.
You have to give at least one fantasy character.
I do not like Lucius the Eternal. I think he is unfair. I think that stinks.
Yeah,
he's a special boy. Come on.
Yeah, his system. The more I read into it, the more it goes, that's awfully convenient. About it's like, if they feel pleasure at any point, even if they killed him like months ago, and they feel pleasure about something kind of unrelated, it still counts. And it's like, okay, sure.
Yeah, come on. Like, that's not right.
Do you have a fantasy character?
Off the top of my head, no. I mean, there are ones I think are quite wretched, but I kind of like that. I think it's great fun.
Yeah.
Wretched is good.
Wretched is nice.
Yeah.
Fair is foul and foul is fair.
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head that I just dislike outright. Like, wish that wasn't there.
Well, if anyone jumps out at you, feel free to throw them up.
Yeah, just there's a small aside in that one. For me, the things that I dislike in Warhammer are always when characters act one way and in another book they act another, and they are just incompatible, and they are not properly justified for why they're incompatible. And that's the thing that bugs me most.
So you hate Karl Franz?
And characters like that, but it's the event rather than the character that it bugs me. So Karl Franz doesn't bug me at all. Karl Franz and everything done to him kind of does bug me because it could have been, with a careful editor, gently smooth so all of them would have made sense.
We could have a fucking museum with all the different versions of Karl Franz.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Eltharion. Look at Eltharion go from, hey, I'm Eltharion the Griffin. No, I'm blind. No, I'm not. I've got my eyes back. Pop. I'm back at my Griffin again.
I miss Eltharion the Blind. That was a fun storyline.
He was a fun, he was.
Ricky Chapman. We remember cooking, talking about one of his campaigns, we remember cooking for a High Elf Lord after fighting Druki as an ogre butcher. We wanted it to be remembered, so we cooked spiced cold one flank on a spread of roasted garlic-covered bread. He enjoyed it.
I'm glad to hear he enjoyed it.
Wonderful.
Thinking about how fucking slimy cold ones are.
Like numb your mouth a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. It would have a numbing effect, which could actually be quite the sensory experience.
Yeah.
Necromancer Kobold, some of the most fun I've had playing roleplay games is personal narrative difficulty. I love Skaven, Ogres, and Necromancy. Others may prefer other ways of play. Players all differ between themselves. Very true. Very true.
I think that we have this in common, perhaps, because I love playing outsiders. I love to play characters that have their own worldview that may be distinct from the setting they find themselves in, and they have to reconcile that with their newfound peers. I think that's exciting, food for wonderful roleplay, an interesting lens to view a setting through, and I like to embody that where I can in my game. So I totally get it.
Yep, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite character that I've been playing is a character, I completely random generated him. I did not pick anything, and I ended up with a witch hunter. And I've loved him so much because it's been a challenge for me. Because, to be frank, he's a super racist, speciesist, zealotrous asshole.
Yay!
And over the last 2 years, a lot of those hard
edges type, Sotek.
Yeah. But to be fair, I also randomized the order, and I got Order of the Cleansing Flame. So I don't know what you want me to do. But over the last 2 years, a lot of those edges for him have smoothed out over time because they had to. Because I made sure that he was compatible with the group we were playing with. And he's changed a lot as a person, which now causes him a lot of conflict because now he feels like he is morally failing what he was raised to believe in because he's trying to be a better person, which doesn't fit with what he thinks he's supposed to do. And it's fun. It's a narrative. It's a challenge, and I enjoy the challenge of it.
One of the, I think, joys of what Vera was suggesting concerning playing a character who is perhaps outside of their cultural norms and attempting to come to terms with that in a variety of different ways. It also provides exactly what Sotek was discussing, which is this opportunity for a growth arc.
Yes.
An ability to take the character that you start with, and you think you know, particularly when you're starting a new roleplay game, you think you know who the character is, but it's only through playing it that you understand. And then as you play that character, and that character begins to realize things about the world around them, not only are you developing the first character you created and giving it its first real shell, but then past that, you're beginning to form this new version of the character. So you're almost building two characters at once, which is super, super fun to do when you're at the table, as you slowly learn who they were and you learn who they are becoming. And that's something that sometimes is very easy to miss if you just play the same sort of, I'm not going to say the same type of character. You might be playing a completely different, class, to use the broadest of brushes to discuss it. But if you're always playing the same cultural character each time, I'm always playing from the Empire, I'm always playing someone here, you often miss out on those potential role play situations unless the GM starts taking you different places, allowing you to view a different world, and then perhaps you yourself change because of what you've learned.
I do know a guy, though, that has a very funny strategy when it comes to role play, where he basically always starts off as the exact same character, always, but it just goes different routes as he plays through the campaign. It's very funny to me. Mr. Ward says, Vera, for no particular reason, do you have any thoughts about Balthazar Gelt? You're late, Vorn. You're late.
I'm a fan. I love memes.
He is. Gelt, I will never cease to be genuinely pleasantly surprised at how Gelt went from, if you were a Warhammer fan before Total Warhammer came out, Gelt wasn't really an important character.
Tiny.
He was very tiny, and he kind of just existed in the background. He didn't really do anything until the end times. The end times really added and made him very important. But he was just kind of
stupid.
he was just kind of there. And then Total War came out, and he became one of the most popular characters in the setting because of memes, which is just great. And I love it.
It's just so funny that he's become this sort of thing, like, welcome to Astalia, gentlemen, with the Gold College is perhaps the least military out of all of them. It's great.
I know it's like we have turned Balthazar Gelt into a enthusiastic Vietnam helicopter pilot, which is Gelt's up there how do you shoot the Beastmen children? He's like, oh, you just lead them a little bit. He's just it's very funny what's happened to that character. So got a couple questions here. This one's for very specific. We got a couple here. So one thing that I liked here was so for you in particular, what is it like moving between all the different roles and hats you have to wear of being a writer versus a streamer and content creator versus a voice actor? Are there any difficulties or advantages, in your opinion, that come from having to or choosing to pursue so many different things?
Yeah, so I sometimes describe like what I do and my core skill as words. I like words. I think they're exciting. I think that being a writer helps a lot with streaming in particular because I like to think at least that I have a decent grasp of the English language. I can express myself in ways that are somewhat eloquent, and I'm decent at doing this off the cuff, which helps a lot. I'm never at a loss for things to say, and in turn, doing a lot of speaking helps me write. It gives me a more ready spark for when I sit down to do dialogue and so on, and in turn that helps inform voice acting because I have my own perspective on how a character should feel, and I can embody that and bring it forward. So I think there's some relation between every kind of creative project. Everything that I've ever read or consumed or studied has added up within me to help forge my perspective on what art is and what kinds of things I like to make. I see there as being some relation between all of this. I think of myself as having like sort of a gestalt creative project to do a lot of things. Soon to be a motion capture artist also for some games that I work on, and like also this here. So everything kind of connects. If I get more into the visual arts, those will also be informed by what I've studied, what I've read, what I'm interested in. I think that having a diverse artistic project is a wonderful thing in a lot of ways because the more different skills you build and the ways they interact with each other might surprise you. You can uncover new angles of attack for projects, and it's been a nice time.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I've rather famously amongst my friends been a wearer of all the hats for most of my creative life. I have done almost every job you can do in the roleplay game industry and gaming industry in general. I have done voice acting. I have done live action roleplaying. I have done editing. I've produced entire game lines. I've done game design. I've done writing, obviously, for games. I'm an artist. I do cartography for like Critical Role or for Warhammer or whatever it might be. I've done pretty much every job you can do. And through that, I've never really, when people say to me, when you do all these things, don't you think, you could concentrate or, and like, they're all the same thing to me in many respects. And I really liked your answer because I agree, not just wholeheartedly. It's not just that they inform each other all the time, that for me, they're almost all part of the same great creative endeavor. And as you do each part, it directly informs, is part of the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Meaning that I've never really seen myself really as how I'm described, which is, strangely enough, sitting here with my cat ears and hat, as a wearer of all the different hats. I've always just thought of myself as just someone who's doing creative stuff that he really freaking enjoys. And yes, others may see that as bouncing from one place to the next and doing nothing more than fueling my constant ADHD brain, which is jumping about all over the place. But I like to think that no, there is a deep level of consistency to everything that I'm doing.
So here's where I'm going to throw a wrench at the Spanners because they're both liars, and I could prove it. Of that, what it really is if you ever sit in a room where you watch these people with that much creative energy, and you go, it's fine, you're done. You can put it out. They go, no, it's not good enough yet. Go, you're done. We have to go. Stop.
So true. I mean, yeah, I am that guy. It's fair.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like an ADD thing. Maybe that's the secret, is that
probably. So a good question here, I think, especially for people that are looking to get into writing, is do you have any advice on how to keep your writing voice when you're creating something, especially in a collaborative setting like Warhammer? How to keep, what's the balance between the adding in information versus adding in Vera to the setting, if that makes sense? And do you have a particular strategy you use to confront that?
The most important thing is to be a good editor, to polish your work and be aware of where it's going to fit into the book and to be aware of what the tone is of what you're trying to bring across. I did a lot of tone exercises in school. I thought it was useful to write short stories that emulated a specific tone from authors I liked to the Old Testament. And I think that that was a useful exercise in this vein because it is important to stay true to the kind of language and the kind of expression that people have come to expect from a particular setting. Warhammer has a long history and sort of an energy that people want to expect to see and should get to see. I think that the voice of Vera comes through and the sorts of things that I find interesting, but those should be portrayed in a way that is sort of in line with the rest of the book and the setting as a whole. Because it's important that like I provide things that can be built on in the future. And it's important to look forward as well as back.
Yeah, you're standing on the shoulders of giants. But in turn, you're also propping up the people who are following you. Which means that yes, you want to inject something new and exciting and new into everything, but when you're working on a larger project which is deeply collaborative like Warhammer, at the same time you have to ensure that what you're writing matches, and that's not necessarily just tone, it's also just clean content. The actual type of content that you're suggesting should be added to the game, and the different eras will have different ideas on what is appropriate, useful, and acceptable to add to a game, and you have to be sensitive to that also. But broadly speaking, you should be looking to create work that matches in some fashion when you're working. But that's quite different to your own stuff, where you're going to have your own ideas about what you feel is important. Having said all that, though, when I'm doing bits for LAWhammer, for example, I still tend to write in a very similar tone to the one that I used when I was writing either second edition or just even when I was doing back first edition bits and pieces. I still tend to use that tone. Because it matches what everybody expects for that, where my own personal stuff tends to be significantly more blunt sometimes and much more extravagant in places. But that's the personal tone in comparison to the stuff that you do commercially. Yeah, but I really strongly recommend the suggestions you made there about writing to tone. And doing tone exercises. If you're out there thinking about doing writing, not the first one is always read. But once you've read, consider how you could write what you've just read. And that could be, as they're like testament pieces, ancient pieces of text, and how that might be fragments of awesome or somebody else's writing style. I remember one attempt to try and write like Stephen Donaldson. And I found that exceedingly difficult. He's an author, by the way. I tried to write like Michael Moorcock. I found that much easier because he's right close to the pulp line. And he is exceedingly brief in his writing. In 150 pages, he's finished a novel that other writers would take 500, 600 pages to write. And he's brought more imagination into that space than most writers will over an entire 3-book series. I found that much easier because the brevity of the language was also powerful in terms of ensuring that what you wrote was, in turn, really full. So that was super exciting to try. Go do it yourself. Find your favorite author, read through it, and you might actually find that after analyzing your favorite author, they stop becoming your favorite author. Word of warning. Word of warning.
That's very funny.
There's nothing like analyzing something you love and going, can I do this? And then finding out, yes, you can. And you think you could do it. Oh, you can do it better. Oh, no.
Ooh.
Cole Patterson has a bit of a follow-up question for Vera of if you could voice any character in the Total War series. So if you could just voice a Warhammer character, who would be your go-to? I know who I would pick for Vera.
Well, I'm curious now.
No, you have to answer first.
Oh my!
you have to answer first.
Oh, my heart wants to say that I do a fun job of one of Loek's troops, some Shadow Dancer, perhaps one of the voice packs there. But really, I think it'd make a good goblin.
All right.
So what I would give to Vera, I think Vera could actually do a really good job with Nayef the Prophetess, in my opinion.
Nayef,
oh,
nice.
Okay.
Nayef,
I think
she
would do a very good job with that.
I quite like her. Okay. I'm on it.
And she's super fun. Also, anyone that hasn't looked at her character design has remained amazing because she got that If you ever want to see like, oh, the Eldar elf crossover, she wears a full-on like Eldar piece as part of her kit because she never got updated after 5th edition, and they just kept it, and it looks great. She looks super cool.
Yeah, she does. Agreed.
So from here, we have up to... have you found it more difficult writing for something that is an established setting like Warhammer, or do you find that writing for a structured setting is easier than like making something yourself from scratch?
So the challenges you face when writing in something that, as Andy said, is built on the shoulders of giants and has decades of established material are different than the challenges you face when writing a original piece in its own setting. It's very hard to compose a novel, for example. There's a lot of work that goes into that in terms of planning and structure that is less of a concern when writing sections of an RPG. In contrast, writing to tone, as I've said, and staying true to the setting's material and attempting to provide things that are useful for play is a different kind of task. I have not done any kind of black library writing, but I have written large swaths of lore material that are providing material background and like different historical elements of the setting, and that kind of writing is easier in a lot of ways than doing the same thing for a original setting where I'm doing all of the generative work as well. It's a different kind of challenge, I would say. Having guidelines to work in general creatively can actually be an advantage in many ways because it can be stimulating to the creative process to have restrictions. Like in most of my writing classes, exercises were given where we had particular limitations in what we were doing, and this is good for you. This is also oftentimes a source of inspiration. When you have an open field and a blank canvas to write in, it can be quite daunting. Like I've had attempts at writing like a light novel that I dropped because I planned it poorly, and then I've had short stories that I was quite happy with that I've refined into things that are, I think, quite good. And those are just different experiences than writing on contract to write sections of things.
Yeah, I cannot agree how much having some useful guidelines can absolutely change the entire creative process. And I'm going to give an example which is so far beyond this, but actually almost directly applies that, you see, I've got 2 daughters. And we had to name them. We're parents. Partly that's something parents do. And most parents, when it comes to new names, will take one of several options. One will be the easy route. Oh, I'll just copy a name, copy paste from some relative. I've got a family tradition to copy paste from. Or alternatively, they'll start looking through name dictionaries and try to find the one that they think looks right. But there's 2 of them, and inevitably they have different tastes. And if we had left ourselves with an open goal, as in we didn't have nice guidelines for how we were going to name our child, we would probably have been there forever, because there are so many brilliant names, so many great names, so many beautiful names that just sing. And we are creative people, both my wife and I. That wasn't going to be a good idea. So right from the very outset, we established our own guidelines, our own rules. And our guidelines were super simple. If it was a boy, it was going to have my initials. If it was a girl, it was going to have my wife's initials. We happened to have 2 girls. So we had 2 sets of girl names with her initials. And because of that tightening, it made it very easy to just go no to a lot of potential thought and say yes to the thought that's important. And it's far tighter. And the same applies, I find, to writing. If I have a writing plan that I'm working to, if I have something that I know I need to do, it's much easier to conclude that work than it is to have an open goal of you are writing a thing. Away you go. It can be as long as you want, about anything you want. And then you're spending a lot of time trying to figure out what all the guidelines are that you're going to have to force almost upon yourself to ensure it gets completed. So when you're writing within a framework like Warhammer, all of those tram lines not only are useful for ensuring you write the right thing, they're also incredibly useful for the creative process because you are thinking in the right direction, hopefully, all the time and not wasting time with everything else. So if you are out there at the moment doing any creative endeavor, no matter what it might be, I strongly recommend being strict with yourself and giving yourself guidelines, giving yourself lines that you won't cross to ensure that you get your thing done. And this is coming from someone who has enormous difficulty, as Sotek very clearly pointed out earlier, getting things
with love.
finished. Yeah, getting things finished. But part of the process of realizing that's who you are, and realizing that's what most people are in some fashion or other out there, is also the process of figuring out how to finish projects. And one of the greatest and simplest steps you can take towards finishing the project is accurately defining that project. And when you work in someone else's project, they already have very clear fenced off areas that you can work within, which means it's actually, I find, much easier to do than it is to do your own thing.
Yeah. Oh, geez. One thing I'll add to that is everything Andy said applies. Like, even if you're like, well, I'm not a writer or artist. Like, if you ever want to commission anything on this fucking earth, do what that said. As someone that has to has commissioned a lot of art and stuff, artists will hate you if you do not show up with like good guidelines of like, this is what I want. Very specifically. I've learned that the hard way.
Yeah, that's 100% true. I was doing a talk here in Edinburgh just last week about commissioning art and being an art director and how to do it, because I wear all the hats. And a core component of that is being very clear with whomever you're working with what the guidelines are and how you can tell that they have finished the work, when it should be finished by, and the process that's in place to ensure that both sides are happy with that. And often it's not a big, 6-page document or some equivalent. It can be nothing more than like 3 or 4 sentences in a row that just clearly define everything in a fashion that both sides can understand. And if you're in a position to organize contracts, always, always, always have contracts. Because the contract isn't just there to protect yourself and to protect the other person from the potential legal ramifications of things going wrong. That's what it's really there for. No one uses it for them, ever. I have never, in 40 years worth of acting professionally and a variety of different creative endeavors, used a contract to actually go to court. What they're really there for is to define what the work is. The important part is, when is it due? What's the process? When do things get handed over? How long does it take before an edit comes in? How many revisions or some equivalent to the work can be asked for from the creative person to ensure that both sides don't get frustrated when it doesn't turn out the way they expect? The commissioner isn't happy because the work isn't what they expected, or the creative isn't happy because they get told that what they turned in isn't what they want. And they're like, but that's what you asked for. Ensuring all those guidelines are in place is essential for both sides.
Yes.
Yeah, just random good life lesson thrown in there.
Yeah, totally. Okay, there we go.
I have a question, which is that we talked about a little bit earlier for Vera, is that what I'd like to hear about is, we mentioned a little bit about the Dreaming Wood. And one of the things that I'd like to hear about is what, for those that don't know, it's a place within Atholoran that's kind of like almost a pseudo bridge allegedly between the realm of Slaanesh, or the realm of chaos, and Atholoran, of this place where like the ethers and reality sort of, overmesh. What I'd like to hear about is what in particular, because you mentioned that you have a profound interest in it, what in particular about it draws your interest, and then from there, if you had the ability, what would you want to do with it?
So, just to start, I think that it's interesting as a place that is forbidden. I think it is interesting as a place that sits outside normal reality. It plays by different rules. It is a dangerous place, and it is a place that is sacred in some ways to war dancers. It is a place that is very special. It is separate from the rest of reality. It is demonic, malefic malice, but it is also a useful tool, perhaps, because it connects all of these different locations. And we have precedent now for elements of the Dreaming Wood that extend outside of Atholoran proper. In fact, I would go so far as to say that it is not an inversion of Atholoran itself, but perhaps the flip side of the world tree, whose roots extend all over the place. And as such, it serves a very useful campaign role, quite potentially, by allowing characters to move all over the world. In fact, if we take it as sort of a mirror or shadow of the world tree, perhaps even it might extend places the world's roots no longer do, because it is an echo, right? A dangerous one, but it is something that operates outside of that. So I think it's quite interesting in a practical sense as well as a mythological sense, because it is mysterious, it is sinister, and it is very useful. It is a method through which you can enter Athel Loren from outside or exit it from within. It is perhaps a connection point to the realm of Slaanesh, the realm of chaos, the realm of the Elven Arvid, all sorts of places. And I think that makes it very interesting and very fruitful.
I actually really like that. I had never really thought of it as being a sort of reflection of the world roots. Of being able to the idea of it reaching to places where the world roots no longer can, which is often due to like a source of corruption or something that has like poisoned the roots to the point that they wither and are no longer reached there, I find to be very, very cool. As that could actually allow for more unique interactions between just as this is something the Wood Elves use, of this could give us maybe some explanations of there's a relationship between the Dreaming Wood and like the Beast Paths and the Beastmen, how the Beastmen are able to do something similar even though it's distinct. Like they're not entering
yes
the world roots, but they're still doing functionally very similar things.
I think that viewing it this way reconciles a lot of that. Like, what are the beast paths? Maybe they just have a tunnel they've found. It makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that it's useful in a campaign. It's interesting. The interior of the Dreaming Wood itself makes for an interesting place to stage battles between the agents of Slaanesh and powerful shadow dancers. And if portals to this can open in all sorts of places, then very suddenly a campaign might enter this dark forest from which there is no obvious escape, where demons lurk and they might be spat out somewhere they didn't intend to go. There are a lot of useful and interesting things that can be done with it. I find it very exciting, especially because it is inconsistent. Some of these portals only appear during specific times of the year under particular conditions, which could make navigating them even more the task of an experienced shadow dancer who knows these secrets as they have been whispered them by Loek. I think it's just such a fruitful location. This is my view on it, but I think that it makes sense and is intriguing. So,
no, I like that a lot, because it's one of those places that always has had that tantalizing edge if it feels like there should be something so much more to it, other than like it's kind of like it's kind of how like demons get in and stuff. But then you get these fun stories about how like a war dancer will go in and there's this epic quest of them recovering 6 ancient artifacts that were more than likely scattered around the world by the OG elves before they all split up and everything. And if it's just this small pocket realm, that's all it is, then it doesn't make as much sense as it's actually connecting to these places that have become so corrupt, but are still attached to the physical realm in various other locations, which adds to that mythos in a really, really intriguing way, I think.
Yeah, like I like it as a parallel and a sort of a scaffolding almost from the Oak of Ages. Like we could look at like the potential nature of the construction of the thing by the old ones, but it makes sense. There's this network similar in scale that is almost disused, perhaps. There's a lot of ways we could interpret this, and I think it can be very interesting. It sort of suffers from the same symptoms as anything else that is thoroughly mired in Ulgu, though, and that it is mysterious, and writing it is a challenge, and that you need to leave room for inscrutability and possibility and intrigue. But I think that it is a really exciting space, and that it can open up a lot of cool passages quite literally in a campaign setting.
So my last question before we because we're approaching time of
already. How can it already be time? We've just started chatting.
So
Vera, you're so lovely. It's just the worst. It's like time just flies by.
One of the things you got to write on that we discussed a little bit about, but I'd like to hear you expand a lot more on, was I was really excited and genuinely surprised, but in a really good way, to see that the Spites actually got to play a significant role in the Niverus book, where a lot of people, and this is just kind of due to the context of the High Elf book versus the Wood Elf army books, and they're trying to keep the army books very distinct. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that Ulthuan, of course, is a super fucking magical place where spirits are very, very active, and would often think of Spites as, that's just Athel Loren, as opposed to, no, they're like all over the place, especially in magically resonant zones. So for you, what was the experience and the plan of going into the Everest book and deciding from your point of view of putting spites there, and also how to design them to make them a unique expression versus what we're used to in like Athelloren?
Well, I thought that it was such an exciting opportunity because I love forest spirits, and I think that they're a great way to express the truly magical nature of the land. But it was important to keep that relationship different because whereas the Azrai are spirit packed into the wood and they have common cause and a shared nature with the spites, this is not so for the High Elves, who are in fact in some opposition to the goals of the spites, who are again more in line with the naturalistic grove tending inclinations of the Azrai, whereas the High Elves in their way log, they occupy space, they take away from the natural bounty to exist, and they have no formal agreement with the spites, not as such, until perhaps a representative of them comes to ask for consideration. So the relationship that I wanted to craft is one that is somewhat antagonistic, wherein the spites are a known pest and a bit of an issue at times because the elves are very aware of them. Unlike humans who might not see them quite so well, they are able to quite effectively annoy elves. This is a bit of a return to this idea that elves might have senses that are sufficiently keen as to be bothered by things that a person might not be. They can see the little bastards flying around and heckling things. And that encourages them to get more creative with how they prank elves and pick on them, but also motivates a more direct form of engagement. So I was, when I wrote the parks and green spaces of Cothique, I wanted to acknowledge this presence and make it feel very fresh. Like there are not enough spites in the old world to really be that bothersome in a cityscape, right? It's uncommon. But here, it is quite different. There are very many, and they can be enlisted to do all sorts of mischiefs. We have a spite who is quite prominent in the book that I think is a horrible, wonderful bastard. It was my favorite art in the book, and he is a great little option for characters who are looking for a different lens of experience and go through. Perhaps if they want to get one over on the elves and show them what for, and we'll see them a little less dignified, perhaps he's a good choice. And there's all sorts of angles for more malefic pranks and whatnot. And his motivations are, of course, tied very much to the mission of the nature spirits throughout the world.
Yeah, I love very much how the spice were brought in to give Ulthuan that of where the wood elves have this feeling of like, you know, how you mentioned that they're interwoven with Athelloren. Like there's really it's very difficult to truly see the degree of separation between the forest spirits and the Azrai. Like it exists, but it's fairly narrow. Versus for the High Elves, who, although are good guys, they're still a traditional civilization with industry and trying to build things and expand. And also they have to kind of deal with a lot of the ramifications of like what the Sundering did to Ulthuan, where the Dark Elves got to kind of fuck off and escape necessarily answering to any spirits that may reside in Ulthuan. The High Elves don't have that luxury. And seeing that explored is it's very fresh, and I've been enjoying it quite a bit.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that section.
Yeah, I was super pleased to see it included because it's one of those sections that could easily not have been, and it might have still felt like it was a High Elf book. But for those of us who are looking for certain things that are often missing, I would have gone, oh, it's a shame they didn't do that. You know how it is. The bit that you expect to be in there. And it was. And I was like, oh, great. That's made me a happy man.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it was also a way to express the superstition of the Cothique because that's part of their running narrative. So this idea that the spites deliberately spread false rumors that are advantageous to them, like, hey, maybe you give them butter, they'll be nice to you. I thought that was a great, like, fun nod to it. And that means the world to me. Thank you so much. Really.
Yeah. The Spite Mafia is great. I love the Spite Mafia. But and that, unfortunately, we're out of time.
Are we out of time already? Well, there we go. Thanks. That was great. I really enjoyed that.
No, thank you. This has been wonderful. What a great time. What a great conversation. I'm so grateful for being brought on. This has been a great deal of fun.
And so, in turn, so grateful that you had so many marvelous answers to the questions.
Yeah, this was a very, very lovely chat. Although I have been posting it throughout the stream, Vera, if you would be so kind as to just kind of tell people like where they can find you, what you're up to. Well, let's start with where they can find you, and then we'll go from there.
Yes, hi. I am Vera Samila, as written here all over the net on YouTube, on Twitter, on Blue Sky, here on Twitch.tv, on all over the place. I stream Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays right now around 5 p.m. EST. I make videos sometimes. I make shorts and things. I have a new model coming up with fancy new captures. I get my mocap stuff set up. So if you're into
exciting
art of VTubing, there's going to be some cool stuff happening there. I'll do a debut stream of sorts at some point. I work on Love Web, a cartoon about the internet. It's a cool little educational project. A new episode is almost done. That's cute. I voice act there. I drop down like this. I'm very monotone. I'm kind of playing the voice of reason, etc. I work on Open Fortress, a cool little video game coming soon to Steam. It is a boomer shooter set in the TF2 engine and universe. I wear a lot of hats. I do many things, and you can find me at these places. I'm always happy to hang out on stream if you have other questions about my work or about Warhammer things. I love having sudden ADD segues into Warhammer lore, one of my favorite subjects, obviously.
Yeah, you fit right in.
Yeah. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but any major projects that are either coming up that you would like people to check out, or things that have recently finished that you'd like people to check out?
Recently we raised $1,000 for the VTuber SummerSlam, going to Gamers Outreach. I'm quite proud of that. That was a really wonderful time. So I'm proud of that. That was cool. And I think one of my biggest upcoming things is definitely going to be this pending debut. I'm going to have a stream where I talk about myself a lot. If you want to get to know me better and show off all the cool features of the new model, and that'll be a thing. And hopefully the next few months we'll see on the timeline. Otherwise, that's sort of that the new Love Web episode. Open Fortress, check us out, openfortress.fun. That's going to be a big deal. I'll be streaming tournaments and things as we get the beta underway. If either of you gentlemen likes boomer shooters and if you would like to play in these sort of open beta we're doing, let me know.
Awesome.
Yeah,
excellent.
Lots of stuff ahead. Follow me on Twitter and you'll get updates. Wow. Or in my Discord if you want to really commit to the bit.
Ooh.
So, you heard it here. Make sure to check Vera out on all those places. Once again, links have been posted all over. And if you're watching this after it's streamed live, the top pinned comment will have all of her stuff in it. So please do check that out and support the lovely Vera. She's wonderful and awesome. And we were very, very pleased to have her come join us today, and her sacrifice 3 hours of her time. She could have been doing literally anything else to come chat with us. Did you just now move the Lorebeards
I just realized that we didn't have enough. I was like, what the heck? I mean, I'm going to do it before the end of the stream. I'll feel better. So nice. I did it anyway.
The last 2 minutes. Nice.
Yeah. I mean, I made the logo for a reason. We should have it somewhere.
We're professionals here.
100% professional.
And Wardens of Cothique out now, by the way. Whoa!
Hey!
And the link for that is thrown all over the place as well, which if you use that link, I'm an affiliate, so I get a small cut too. So for anyone that does that, please do. And for anyone about Lorebeard stuff, we'll be back this Wednesday.
Oh, we're on Wednesday, and we are discussing a big what if. Oh, no, we're not what if. We're doing a tier list. I got completely confused with what we were discussing on stream the other day. That was last week. So famously, professionally, he's just going to shut up.
So we'll be doing a tier list stream on the Lizardman Temple Cities, which will be super fun and not bizarre at all. And we're totally not going to be dealing with really tiny amounts of text and trying to see what we can do with it. But
it's going to be fine. I'm really looking forward to this one because a lot of our tier list streams have been about characters, as you'd expect. But this one's going to be diving into some locations and going through the nitty-gritty of what they present. And then you, as is often the case with our tier list streams, are the ones who get to decide whether you think they are good, bad, or otherwise. But do be aware, we are dealing with Sotek in the stream. And as we all know, he thinks all Lizardman cities should be top S tier every single time. Nonsense! I will be bringing balance to this particular situation. Like an elf, there is only one way to move forward, and that is to be in balance. Not imbalance, Sotek, all Lizardman cities are great. Yeah, no!
Yeah, like an elf, ruining literally everything. And from there,
nicely done.
That is us done. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you all around.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Until next time. Bye-bye.